Good afternoon. We're back in session, and we'll begin our afternoon with the Healthy Responsible Students Committee led by Mr. Reginald Keenan. Mr. Keenan.
Mr. Keenan?
Okay, I'll turn to Vice Chair Duncan, who indicates he would present the first item. So Vice Chair Duncan.
Yes, on behalf of my beloved leader, Reggie Keenan, we will report on behalf of the HRS agenda or HRS committee today. I have a really significant item that we want to report, HRS 1, which is lead and asbestos remediation in public school units and child care facilities. This is some legislation that was passed during the last session. I think it ultimately stemmed from federal funds in the amount of $150 million, $33 million of which is allocated for testing for lead in water, or up to that amount. The remainder for a potential system of remediation. And Robert Taylor, Dr. Taylor is here to report on this, followed by his colleagues Kim Lawson, who's our section chief of plant operations, and Brandon Walker, who will report on behalf of the legal side on rules that relate to this. So we have an all-star team here to report on this. Dr. Taylor.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan, Chair Davis, and the board members. Thank you for the opportunity to share this information with you. I do have my team with me, and I'm going to bring up Kim Lawson. I was going to go through a portion of these PowerPoints, but he was so passionate about it last week that I said I would just allow him to do that. What he was presenting you is background on the legislation, where we are with water testing. That is the first portion. What we will be dealing with, and then Mr. Walker will come and share with you the rules that have been passed by the HHS that we will be asking the board to report. So at this time, I'll turn it over to my good friend, Mr.
Good afternoon. I'm Kim Lawson. I'm the Plant Operations Section Chief. And one of the things I would like to say, as Dr. Taylor was saying, we are very appreciative to many people about this effort. We are passionate about it. We do care, and the governor and the legislature work together in a bipartisan effort and have made these funds available. So we just want to say we applaud that effort. So, if we will, this is a large, significant effort that's going to be going on to the state, across the state, with our public schools and also child care facilities. It is a total of about $150 million, and we'll be talking about how we're going to split that up here in just a moment. It is a time-sensitive issue. I know it's a lot of money, and we really, to do with this kind of unprecedented kind of effort, we're going to have to work through some calendar constraints, and we'll be talking about that in a moment. That's why we're here today ultimately. So, the next slide is the effort is basically falls neatly into two different components. The larger component deals with lead paint issues within the schools and asbestos issues that are in the schools. There will be a effort where we go in and test for those materials and also have some abatement. This first component that we've got on the slide for you has about $117 million. It is non-recurring. It is for, again, as we said, PSUs and child care facilities. We are working with DHHS and to develop some mechanisms for implementing legislation both on some of the testing and also with the payment for some of the work that is carried on later on in the remediation of that. So we're working along with that. So next, the next component, and actually this will be the first component that we're actually starting with now. And that's $32.8 million. Again, it's non-recurring funds, and they're used for testing and remediation of lead levels in drinking water. And again, as we talk about the water, we're looking at what EPA would discuss as water that is consumed. So we're talking about the water taps, kitchen taps, those kind of things, the water fountain taps, those things. And the DHHS folks, we have been in some discussions with them. They are basing this on some previous efforts that they have worked, and it is, they've had pretty good success. They have found that in the other effort with some of the child care facilities that they have not had too much lead show up. So we're depending on what they have had, this kind of beta test, if you will, and we're going to be basing our efforts moving forward on that experience. Next slide, please. Again, there is a component in here funding the, out of that $32.8 million, we have the testing that will occur. And then there is a remediation component funding as well. And so that would be, in the previous history DHHS has had, they're finding that they can put on some filters on these lines, and that basically takes care of the majority of the issues they've had in their beta test, basically. There may be some requirement for a replacement of some service lines or some pipes, maybe some fixtures, whether they are faucets themselves or a water cooler kind of installation. And so we'll be working on that. That is available to all the schools and until that $32.8 million runs out. So next. Actually, I missed one thing. They're working on the meeting. There's some rules that we'll be talking about in a moment, and so we'll be talking about that. So let's go to the next slide. In our meetings with DHHS, we have, again, we were not involved in the initial framing of this legislation, but we've been reviewing the legislation. We've had our legal folks involved with it and looked at the technical issues. We have talked to them about how they implemented their previous efforts. We have also shared some ideas on how to do that work so it doesn't tie down too many of our school leadership, such as principals and teachers, and we worked on that. And they have also had a public comment, and they've gone over that, and we've discussed those comments with DHHS. So some of the things we're looking at with them is how can we effectively and efficiently identify this problem, get our hands around it. How can we get accurate and uniform results? We have discussed the way that their issues have gone. And we're currently talking to them about sampling and how that will take place. There's going to be a lot of samples. And so we're really trying to make sure we get the hands around that. Previous efforts in years past, that was one of the big things, is to make sure we had enough testing available in place, capabilities, testing capabilities, and lab stuff in place to get this work done. They felt they could tackle that. So going forward on the other component, we're talking about the lead paint testing, and we're working on that, looking at how the federal guidelines provide guidance. We're trying to get some similar evidence for child care facilities that they have had, and so we'll be working on that larger component. There are some rules here today, and those you'll see, I guess, in your handout.
Yeah, we need words too.
Okay, so, and basically what we're looking at today is to approve those, correct? So we're gonna talk to them about that from here on, yes.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay.
And that's a great summary and introduction of a quite large project that we've been working on with DHHS. And it's been a nice partnership you know, and as everybody knows, sitting around the table, that we've been in close partnerships with DHHS in the past, especially going through COVID and school kids and things of that nature. So it's been a really nice partnership working with them. As Kim stated, the 2021 budget appropriation bill, session law 2021-180, appropriated about $150 million from the federal COVID and local fiscal recovery fund to establish programs for this lead and asbestos testing and abatement and remediation. And this is both for public school units and child care facilities. And then the next kind of 20-plus slides are the rules themselves. And these are the proposed rules from the DHHS. And as the DHHS, per the session law, was tapped as the lead agency to run the rules and get everything going. And as part of that, they worked with us for some certain refining of the rules. And as you'll see, like, for example, they talk about responsible individuals. And initially that was labeled as a principal of a public school unit, and after discussions with us, it's like, no, that's more appropriate for the superintendent. So there's been a lot of back and forth in kind of narrowing these rules. But what's important for today's purposes is really two things. What these rules are doing, and this is, again, a very large project, but this is a very narrow focus of what we're talking about here today. And this is really, one, testing for lead and asbestos, and then two, restricting access. The abatement and remediation, that's going to come down the road as we keep working forward. But right now, the rules that are in front of you today are for testing, and if for whatever reason something comes back and there's a positive test for lead or asbestos, then it comes to restricting access to that particular area. Again, as we mentioned, DHHS is going through, in cooperation with DPI and the state board, through the temporary rule process, because as Kim mentioned, we're under a very tight time schedule. Per the legislation, funds are required to be obligated by the end of 2024 and then expended by the end of 2026. So there is a real time crunch here. And as we all know, the temporary rules, allow for a bit of an abbreviated rulemaking timeline, enabling us to get this program off the ground a little bit more quickly. As part of the temporary rulemaking, we obviously will have to go through the permanent process. So there's going to be an additional opportunity for public comment. There's going to be another 60-day public comment period. And as Kim mentioned, that we've received, or we, in partnership with DHHS, has received a lot of public comments. And as part of your materials here today, you can look in, and DHHS, to their credit, has done a great job of responding to each individual public comment. And we've worked through them and incorporated it as much as we deemed appropriate. So again, the important part for today is the detection and restricting access aspects of the rule. And then, I'm happy to answer any questions, and then that's why we have the 20-plus slides that kind of further direct any specific questions anybody might have. But what we're asking for today is the board to approve the temporary rules of 10A NCAC 4C .1001 to 1007.
Right, to put a little more definition around that, my understanding is, Brandon, that the temporary rules have been approved by the Rules Commission, and DHHS took the lead in putting those through. So,
correct. No, thank you for that clarification. No, that's absolutely correct. And per the session law, DHHS was tapped as the lead agency, so that's why their name is kind of leading forward here. But yes.
And what is desired from us would be to essentially adopt and approve of these rules so that we stand behind them as well, since they're going to apply to our PSUs, in addition to all the early childhood learning centers around the state.
Correct.
And that's the action for today. That will be for vote tomorrow. Dr. Taylor, you
No,
gonna?
I was just, there were any questions that you want to ask?
Yeah, that was where we're going next. Are there questions about this? This is a significant initiative and it's important. Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a quick question. When you started, you had a match. If someone had a match, the PSU has a match. What is that match? I thought I saw it in there somewhere.
2-to-1 match, if I'm not mistaken.
2 to 1.
It is.
Correct, and that's, I'm sorry, and that's specific to the asbestos testing.
Correct.
Uh,
Which is the most expensive side of it.
Correct.
Yeah, I
Uh,
dealt with that. Yeah. So that 2 to 1 match got me a little concerned when it comes to certain school districts throughout the state. And especially when we look at the age of these facilities throughout the state. Where for the last, we got buildings that 50 years old, 51 years old.
Those are young ones.
And that's young, yes, I guess you're right. But you see where I'm coming from?
No, you're
That
absolutely
match in
right.
there, Mr. Chairman, I got a big concern about that match.
Yeah, it's in the statute. That's not in the rules.
Yeah, well,
Just to-
yeah.
And you'll see, those came up in the public comments as well. But again, this is a large project that, is coming at us in multiple steps. And we're not quite far enough down the road to give any concrete answers to your questions. But I mean, those are being discussed and, we share those concerns. But again, because this is so big, I just want to keep everybody's focus on that what we're here today to approve is really the idea of testing in our schools for the lead and asbestos. And then if that test comes back positive, the first step right now is restricting access. And then as we continue to work forward, we'll have, another opportunity to have this discussion on where the remediation and abatement is going to come from.
So, on this issue, literally all we're voting on right now is these temporary rules. The first testing initiative, which is in process, and we'll come back, there's a lot of things about this that will come back to this board, which I know Dr. Taylor and Kim, you both already
And
said.
so, Vice Chair Dr. Skilling, this first phase is really about testing of lead, water. So they have a proven process of how they've done this. We know this is a portion that we can't get off the ground. But Mr. Hall, your concerns were absolutely the concerns that we had. The 2-to-1 match was for the PSU, not for the daycares. So we had grave concerns about that. That is gonna be a part of the discussion that we talk about moving forward. Both Kim and I had an opportunity to talk with districts and sort of get an idea of what you might be talking about. So you could be looking anywhere from $100,000 to $150,000 to a school. Some could be considerably more, considerably less. So that is a concern about what that would look like. And so as we go forward in the asbestos abatement process, those are the things that we want to have a lot more clarity about before we get to that point. And so we do know that $117 million is a lot of money, but lead and asbestos abatement, I don't even think it scratches the surface. So, what you want to
I agree completely with that. In general, the schools in North Carolina, in general, I feel like they have done a good job over the years of keeping this under control. I think they have been astute, and that they have been quick to deal with it. But as we get into this, we're just gonna say, we're in some uncharted waters, just to be honest. And so, but I'm glad that these funds are available to get things going, so.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
I think our future steps will be, after we get through this, the water testing first, will be to set up the further testing for lead paint and for asbestos. But I think, Mr. Lawson, you may want to provide a little background. We're not starting from scratch on that. There's a lot of data out there from our schools on that already.
The majority of the information is going to be on asbestos. Typically, you have a 3-year asbestos review where you'll have a trained asbestos, usually a company, will go through the facilities. They will visually do an inspection of what has been looked at in the past, and they'll say, yeah, this is in good shape, we're not concerned about being friable, and usually that's the experience that most of the schools will have. So again, I fully, when we get to that point, I'm hoping that these records that they have will be useful and beneficial. We're gonna have to work with the HHS, we'll have to have some discussions on that, we're just gonna have to see how that proceeds.
No, and thank you for those comments, Vice Chair, because you're exactly right. And there has been inspections done in the past from different schools, and we've worked with DHS to grandfather some of that in. So we're not starting from scratch. Some of the reports and some of the testing that I've already done, they meet the requisite standards, then those will be grandfathered in as well.
So the issues, the further issues that will be dealt with, and by the way, the match is $2 of the federal money to $1 from the local, just so sometimes 2 for 1. It becomes unclear who's got the 2 and who's got the 1. But so the things that we'll deal with are completing that testing process on asbestos and lead paint, trying to prioritize what remediation efforts are needed within the confines of what resources are available. And there's some other issues that could arise, for example, in the early childhood area and in some instances in the PSU area. Not every building that would be subject to review for this would necessarily be owned by the state. There are leased premises, for example, in our our charter schools. There are, in the early childhood space, there are a lot of premises that meet that type of situation. So we have to come up with some clarity, and we'll undoubtedly have some discussion about how to best deal with those kinds of issues as well. But that's, right now we need to get this off the ground with the testing, and that's what we're focused on for today. And the advertisement is, these gentlemen will be back more than once as we continue through this process or journey. But the last thing we should take is be happy about the fact there are some funds here to be helpful for this, and so we need to be grateful for that. Other questions?
Just 2 quick questions, just a follow-up to Mr. Hall. So the 2 for 1 match, does that mean if a district is not able to meet the match, that they just don't get the testing? I mean, that just doesn't happen in that district? I mean, that would be the logical conclusion that I would take from this.
Is that at this point, according to the legislation, that if they wanted to access these funds, it would require the 2 funds. So unless they
Can districts use ESSER funds for the match? Was that sort of an assumption maybe that was being made when they put the match in there?
I don't know if that ever came up in the discussion, and that would certainly go back to allowability of fund use. In any way that was associated with the mitigation of COVID, it would qualify.
It would qualify.
Yeah, but I doubt that lead and asbestos abatements. Well, I won't speak to that. They would have to make a request, and it would have to be determined if it was an allowable use.
Community, please.
So I think in that respect, more to follow. I think there are a lot of difficult issues that will have to be dealt with there. Yes, Ms. White.
I would encourage, if we move this along, that we begin having early and often conversations with districts that should a school be identified that it is no longer safe for students to be in the building, that they have another facility ready to go, and that we know that is a very, very difficult task. You might have an empty building, but it might be zoned for industrial, which means it's not appropriate for children. And you're gonna have a lot of upset parents, teachers, and administrators that they cannot deliver instruction as they are required to do. I speak early and often. Today, this is coming, find a spot. especially if they, in their facilities department, they know that they have facilities that are on that bubble. And the districts know which schools were built in X number of years, which ones haven't had a facility improvement plan in process. They know.
And so that's part of what school districts deal with, that they know where these issues are. They have it abated, it's controlled. And so, again, the big concern that we would have is that if we have this under control, is there going to be anything in the testing that would require that we go in and release something that we know we have abated? That's where the grandfathering portion is going to come in. And so all of those things that you talked about, these are exact questions that we ask when we begin to look at the lead and asbestos abatement. Those are real issues for us. We know that we have buildings that are 50, 60, 70, 80 years old, and those issues are there. But districts have dealt with those. But to go back and disturb that, that is an issue. And so we are concerned about it.
Other questions, comments? All right, not seeing any. Thank you for this report. Again, you'll be back with some of these issues that are still ongoing. Thank you for getting us all together. All right, our second, and this is, that was an action on first read. Our second item is an action item from the HRS committee. It's the state board policy amendment about the whole child. Dr. Christy Day presented at our last meeting, and she may be here if there are any questions about this today. Dr. Day.
Good afternoon. Just as a reminder, this item is requesting revisions to the whole child NC policy to reflect suggested proposed member roles who have authority and decision-making power from their respective organizations to influence collectively identify priorities. It's also revising the title from Interagency Advisory Committee to Whole Child NC. That's about it.
Thank you. Any questions for Dr. Day on this item? All right, not hearing any, that will be on for tomorrow. Chair Davis, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. I now recognize Dr. Olivia Oxendine, Chair of the Educator Standards and Practice Committee. Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you, Chair Davis and board members. I am Olivia Oxendine, and I chair the ES&P Committee. Joining me in that responsibility, leadership role, is Ms. Amy White. The first item on the agenda, it's all three items are discussion items for this month. The first item is the ES&P 1, the revised licensure requirements for school administrators, Part 3. I'm going to take the liberty, Chair Davis, and do a quick summary of this item to give the board members a sense of where we're going next with the recommendations that have come forward. So for the past several months, the board, we have heard a series of recommendations representing several stakeholder groups. Those stakeholder groups are in CAPTE, the Principal Advisory Committee that is made up of our principals of the year, the Teacher Recruitment and Retention Committee, and of course our PEPC partners. Last month we heard from another group, I won't call it a stakeholder group, it was NCDPI, and Mr. Tabari Wallace made a presentation, and essentially what he brought to the board was a synthesis, more or less, of the recommendations that had come from the other stakeholder committees. And just let me take a moment and do a quick summary of the recommendations that Mr. Tabari brought before the state board. Let me just reiterate a very important point. The reason for this, the discussions and the recommendations that we have heard have to do with closing a gap between the current licensure practices for school administrators in North Carolina and what the general statute requires us to do. So we're at a point where we are very near a point of getting ready, and I'm not going to put a time frame on it, but I would say maybe 6 weeks to a couple of months, that we will be able to refine those recommendations and move forward. But let me talk about the recommendations for just a minute that Mr. Tabari brought to us last month from the DPI in. The elimination of the licensing exam. The general statute does say that the State Board of Education shall, I don't know whether it's shall or will, but will decide on the licensure exam. So the recommendation, this is a synthesis, and I think this particular recommendation may cross all of the stakeholder groups, so it's a common denominator. In other words, so the elimination of a licensing exam for school principals in North Carolina replaced with a performance portfolio. We currently, our MSA programs, and I'm a faculty member for the new board member, I'm a faculty member in an MSA program. We currently have a performance assessment portfolio, and that was installed probably about 10 years ago. So we already have that particular component in place, and we do use it to make decisions about licensing principals. The second recommendation that Mr. Wallace shared with us is a requirement for a master's degree in school administration that currently is in the law, or, this is an addition, in some other field of study, a master's, okay? The third recommendation is a minimum of 4 years in the area of licensure for school personnel. The current law calls for 4 years, a minimum of 4 years of classroom teaching experience. So this recommendation, again, is a minimum of 4 years in an area of licensure for school personnel. So of course that would include classroom teachers, but it would also include school social workers, and it would also include school counselors. I think those are all the classifications. Dr. Tomberlin could help me remember the others. Okay, and the fourth recommendation that Mr. Wallace brought before us is no fewer than 500 hours for the year-long internship. The year-long internship is composed of 2 consecutive semesters. So the way typically that operates is 200, let's say if a EPP has chosen to go with the 500 clock hours for the internship, that could be 250 hours in the fall and 250 hours. That's minimum. In most cases, your interns will exceed that, 250 hours in the spring semester. So again, no fewer than 500 hours for the year-long internship. Now, you're probably saying, well, what is the maximum? It would probably be up to about 1,500 hours. Our candidates I'll use this as an example, our candidates in the North Carolina Principal Fellows Program, I'm sure that they are up to about 1,500 hours. Maybe they might, and I'm looking down to the principal, our POWs, and I'm seeing some nods down there, so probably about 1,500 hours. Now that's, in some cases, you're gonna have go-getter interns, and they're gonna go beyond that. They may get up to 1,800 hours in a year. That's doing a lot of leadership type activities. So anyway, those are the 4 recommendations that Mr. Tabari Wallace brought before the board last month. And again, they kind of represent a synthesis of the groups. We had other discussions. We talked about the licensure-only pathway and perhaps bringing some consistency around that particular pathway. That pathway is designed for a candidate who already has a master's degree, but they also want to go further and get the coursework and the license to serve as a principal. So the second master's, like the MSA, is not a requirement, as long as there is a master's degree. And there's variability among our EPPs. Some EPPs might require 24 hours of course credit in order to get the licensure, the principal license. Some may require 15 hours. There's just wide variation there. So we also had some discussion around maybe we need to think about an approach to, I don't know how we would do that, but having additional time on our hands to think through how we can maybe have a framework, give some thought to how we can bring some consistency to the licensure-only pathway. We also talked about the internship, and I just covered that, so I'm not going to repeat that discussion. I shared with you some data that someone made available to me. In one case, I did the research on my own. I shared with you that 39 states require principals to take a licensing exam. I've recently learned, read some data from the Commission of States, that 46 states require classroom teaching experience in order to be a principal. The reviews are somewhat mixed on the predictability of the licensing exam. In other words, there is some thinking that the score on a licensing exam could have some carryover in terms of determining the effectiveness of the principal once in practice. One important gleaning for me is that the more I studied and listened to the recommendations, the more I learned, and the more I realized I needed to know about this whole field of developing and licensing our school administrators in North Carolina. A lot is happening in the world of school leadership in North Carolina, a lot of good things. We have the North Carolina Principal Fellows Program, which I call the Legacy Program in North Carolina. It has been around close to 30 years. Some of our POWs are graduates of that program. It's an outstanding program. We need to learn a little bit more about what goes on in that model. You know, what courses do they take? What type of internships are available or are designed? So much is going on in terms of some of our other pathways, like the TP3 model, that is now umbrellaed under the North Carolina Principal Fellows Program. So we have school leadership programs that are now moving into online only, hybrid, but moving into the world of online only. So we need to gather some information about the effectiveness of those programs, because that's going to be the future, I would say, of preparing our principals in North Carolina. So you're probably saying, where am I headed with this discussion? What I would like to propose is that we take a little bit more time. I don't know how much time. It could be 6 weeks, it could be a couple of months. And we go back to the drawing board, look at the recommendations that have come before us, and that I don't want to use the word tweak, we say that too much. I think maybe build out some things. Give more thought to maybe developing or giving some thought to what should comprise a solid internship. What can we do to strengthen the licensure only piece? So I suppose it's a matter of going back to the drawing board and refining. We find ourselves in a recommendation refinement mode for a little while, and work very closely with the General Assembly, our partners in the General Assembly, and get their support for additional time, and so that we can do this work, do it well, do it soundly, and at some point we'll be ready to respond to the request and the needs of our General Assembly partners. At the same time, it's important that we communicate with our EPP leaders and our HR directors and let them know that we're still in a learning mode. They're going to be just fine. This is where the department is going to have to work very closely with our EPP deans and faculty members, our HR directors and our LEAs, because they employ these principals. And they employ these as our school administrators, and they have been doing so going back to about 2011 and before. So, Chair Davis, that concludes my presentation for today, and I'll open up the floor for questions.
Yeah, if I could interject, Dr. Arnstein, thank you for that summary. In fact, listening to your summary of this issue reminds me much of the similar presentations and discussions we've had around teacher licensure, and how we're striving to balance a number of different issues. One is increase the number of candidates that we can consider for principalship and teaching in our schools, given the challenges we face at filling those positions and continuing to recruit high-quality candidates, as well as ensuring that the licensure program provides a degree of certainty that when a candidate goes into a classroom or leading a school, they have the minimum required experiences and qualifications to take on those positions. They're very difficult and complex issues to find the right balance, and perhaps a consideration the board could take is in your interest in doing more detailed work around the principal licensure, we put this issue on a parallel path with the teacher licensure, recognizing that in both cases we're going to need to go to our partners in the General Assembly with our best thinking at the appropriate time, which will likely be in the long session. I don't think this is something that we would try to take up in the short session. So just adding that perspective to your comments and sort of putting it on a parallel path with our teacher licensure, that way we go to the General Assembly in a coordinated and well thought out manner. So that's what I'd offer to support your comments.
Absolutely. Any other comments or questions? I think a comprehensive look at this and a comprehensive package is going to send very strong messages to the General Assembly that we're thoughtful, we're reflective, and we are giving due diligence to this important topic. Ms. Camden.
So this process was begun because our current policy is, we're not following our current policy, is that correct?
Oh,
Is
the
that
law,
recall?
the general statute.
Yeah, or the statute. Doing what Chair Davis just recommended, would that ease the difficulty of the fact that we're not following the statute right now, that we have embarked upon a longer term study of this? I mean, would that take care of that problem?
I think it would put us in a position to develop a solution that addresses that gap in a comprehensive way, and while we're also trying to assist in the district and charter schools in finding the principals that they need to fill their schools. So it will accomplish a host of those issues, including that gap.
And the time frame would be acceptable?
Yes, I think with a little work, I think we can get to a place where we can arrive at a timeline that will work.
Are there other questions or comments? If not, thank you very much, and we'll move on to ESMP2. And ESMP2 has to do, and Dr. Seiberg is coming forward. He is going to present to us a brief update of the application that we have, I think we've already reviewed or we've considered it, from the Department of Community Colleges, and their request is that we grant approval for them to operate as an EPP. We'll be having a little bit more discussion around that later on this afternoon. So I turn to Dr. Seiberg and for your comments.
Yeah, this is just a quick update. Good afternoon. The community college system application for initial authorization as an educator preparation program is now ready for the board to consider. It's been through two peer review cycles, and that proposal has been refined and improved over those two reviews. There does remain one outstanding legal issue surrounding the consideration of this proposal, and that's going to be brought up with you all in closed session.
Any questions, comments? Very good. More later this afternoon. And then we'll move on to the last item, ESMP3, and we have Mr. Carl Logan coming forward. It's always good to have a presentation to remind us that, hey, we're in charge of, we have something to say about driver's education in North Carolina. So, Mr. Logan, I'll turn to you.
Thank you very much. Chair Duncan, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Truitt.
It's a compliment.
Committee Chair Dr. Oxendine, Ms. White, board members and attendees, good afternoon. Our request today is an update to the Driver Education Advisory Committee policy. Over the last few years, DPI has modified the administration and operations of this committee significantly as we anticipate that their role will be key in the state's traffic safety strategy. For a brief review and to provide some background for some recently added members, General Statute 115C-215 requires that the state superintendent organize and administer the program using the criteria and standards approved by the State Board of Education. The statute also requires an advisory committee, which is to advise and make recommendations to the State Board of Education through DPI. In recent history, this committee has been the final step to vet recommendations from the local levels as well as DPI. Our state program plays an important part in the traffic safety industry, which focuses on teen drivers and has a threefold approach of cognitive aspects to initiate operational skills and to hand off to parents. And lastly, the addition of the word education on that second slide. Sorry. On that second slide is that it signifies that the compliance of the United States Highway Safety Act of 1966. There were 4 E's that were mentioned in that policy, or in that statute, in that act: emergency management, engineering, enforcement, and education. It's the second slide. Now it's third. Thanks, Lou. You were provided a draft of the recommendations, and the high-level overview of these recommendations are to make administrative and editorial changes. The strategy is to edit, for the edits are to create consistency in some of the terms and acronyms that are used for readability. Some of these changes were also needed to update and to remove obsolete policies. We also would like to recommend a new partner who is expected to play a significant role or prominent role in our moving forward is the North Carolina Child Fatality Task Force. The third major reason for this policy update is to remove the term limits for critical agencies and essential members who, and the planning and the direction of this state's teen traffic safety education program. So this is a visual of what the committee looks like, and that the two groups and their membership terms, and upon approval, we will be submitting the recommendations to fill the appropriate seats and the committee chair for this year. So please note again that we will be replacing the community colleges with the Child Fatality Task Force. It is also important to note that we are committed to align the program with the goals of those of the state superintendent and the State Board of Education. As we continue to drive forward, we will continue to monitor and as well as monitor and determine whether we can assist in the listed goals and initiatives as they become evident. And you can look down there, you can see the goals that we know that we are impacting at this moment and working within our program. As far as the integration of this particular program, driver education, is often overlooked, but in listening to other state board meetings, we've also noticed where driver education is currently directly or indirectly involved outside of our normal requirements. The elements that are listed here are examples of where the program is integrated into the local and agency focus. In dropout prevention, every licensee is required to make progress toward graduation until they're 18 years of age. In that same legislation, assisting in behavioral challenges at the school level, being that students could lose their licenses if they're involved in some kind of altercation, drugs, alcohol, or physical attack against teachers or other staff there. So you can see that we're trying to do our part in educating the whole child. Some of the anticipated future discussions of this committee will be of obviously the local administrative and educational programs, but we were also using our partners to help us to drive or to determine curriculum modifications. We also play a significant role in the current North Carolina DOT strategic plan for transportation. There's a national initiative also on the horizon. It is a worldwide proven approach to traffic safety, which is the safe system approach, which I'll be hearing more about this summer, but we will determine how we can best integrate that into our program. And as always, we are continuing to collaborate with Division Motor Vehicles on decreasing of duplicate processes, and potential recommendations of statutory changes may impact the licensing process significantly. And with that, Dr. Oxendine, I will yield back.
Thank you very much. Very good presentation. Questions or comments from my colleagues? I think it's a wonderful idea, the concept of keeping certain members of a group of your members on this task force because they bring special expertise to the thinking and the body of work that comes out of your group. And the integration of the concepts across dropout prevention and all skills that affect the development of young people. Very good, very, very fine integration.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Questions or comments? That concludes my report.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. I now recognize Mr. Wendell Hall, Chair of the Government and Community Affairs Committee. Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am Wendell Hall, Chair of the Government and Community Affairs Committee, along with Vice Chair Jill Kennedy. We are here today to hear our commitment again to the children of the state. We're looking at the short session of the General Assembly and making some recommendations from the committee to the total board, along with, in conjunction with, and working with, and supporting with DPI and the State Board of Education, with one request to go before the General Assembly. And with that being said, I'm going to start with Mr. Falkenberg. Good to see you again, my friend.
Good to see you too.
Who will start us off with the presentation coming before us, and I will follow with that.
Thank you, Committee Chairman Hall. And, I just want to say it's been great to continue these conversations since last month with you individually, as long as the Vice Chair of the committee, Jill Kamnitz, and look forward to continuing this conversation throughout this process while we get into the short session over the next, hopefully, only 2 months. Just to rehash it, and I'd be more than happy to go into detail on stuff that we went over last month, but for time's sake, I'll just go more quickly this go around. Just to recap from what we discussed last month, we're definitely trying to have an agency bill that cleans up and realigns general statutes for 22 and beyond. There's a lot of outdated terms, reporting that is unnecessary because of other laws that have taken place. So working with the General Assembly to clean that up. The big one is focusing on any major gaps, needs, and additions with Senate Bill 105, which was the budget, which I'll get into in a little bit later, and then building on previous initiatives of success, and then making tweaks where necessary. And you can just skip. I just pretty much discussed that. All right, let's focus on this page. You can scroll up just a tad bit. Okay, perfect. This is the document that you saw earlier. This is what we have prepared for OSBM and hopefully for the General Assembly as well. Most of these items are the same as before. I'll just briefly go through them. The school psychologist internship program, we need to fix that pipeline that we're seeing right now across our state. The Office of Charter School, Ashley Picaro did a great job this morning discussing the need for these at least these 2 FTEs to help out our Office Charter School, which has not seen an increase since the cap was lifted. Standards and curriculum, Mary Hemphill did a great job discussing the need for additional staff, especially with the new guidelines that we at the department and the board have passed. State of Indian Affairs, they discussed this morning as well. Would like to request that there be a full-time position for this. And now to the next budget item, which is a new request, and I'll talk a little bit more detail on this one. Amy did a great job this morning talking about what the plan is going forward with science of reading. And since our last board meeting, the General Assembly has been asking us for a few months now, what's next with science of reading? And so we've been sharing plans with them. And then the superintendent and myself have had these ongoing conversations with leadership over at the General Assembly. And we've explained the plan that you saw this morning from Amy Ryan, and we said this is how you get it sustained. This is how you sustain science of reading through the state, and make sure that it's a lasting impact for our students and our teachers. And having walked through the plan with them, and having discussed with members over there, we are going to put this request on here for the short session because there's no time to wait. Why hold off until the long session when we do have a plan and we can execute it right now if we had the funding. So what you'll see is 9 regional literacy support coaches. This is one for each region, and then you'll have another one who will be the team leader for all of those. And then obviously the 115 FTEs that Amy spoke about this morning for each district. The startup cost for that, buying computers and whatever else comes along with that to get pretty much a new division basically created. That's for the non-recurring costs of a little over $500,000. And then the other provisions are basically the same until you get down to school transportation and fuel price reserves. And working with Kevin Harrison, Alexis Schaus, and OSBM, this is the figure we're sending right now to the General Assembly and OSBM. A lot can change with gas and fuel prices, as we've seen over the last year. But on another slide of mine, you'll see that when we did the biennium budget, the state based all the projections off of $2.30 a gallon. That's not the reality right now. And having talked with Kevin Harrison on numerous occasions, every 10-cent increase is $2 million increase to the state. We spend a lot of money busing kids around the state. And so this $32 million reflects the increase in gas prices that we currently have right now, and we will continue those conversations with the General Assembly and OSBM to see where we're at during the summer once the budget is proposed and finalized. Any more questions on on that one specifically? Yes, sir.
So we're marking it as a reserve, and I've thought of this as we're a little bit, instead of getting to an emergency place next year, we're advising there's an emergency that may well be in progress, although we can't predict exactly what the number's going to be.
Yes, sir. And my hope would be, and I look around at Kevin Harrison, is hopefully we wouldn't have to tap into this much. But we don't want to be in a situation where our districts do not have the fuel that they need to get the bus the children around. And
agree completely. I guess my question really is that makes up over half of the ask here. Is that fuel reserve, and does it have to be listed exactly that way? Is maybe what I'm asking.
It does not. And when we talk with the General Assembly, with OSBM, it's kind of a package deal. This is what we're requesting. But when this will be pulled out when we're talking with the General Assembly, and we'll talk about DPI requests. And but this is more just a streamline to focus with all you. So you're right. Let's just take that out, subtract $32 million, and so we're asking for a little over $20 million. Yes, sir.
Thank you. That answers my
Yeah, that's a great point, and that's the type of conversations we're having with the General Assembly too. And this just goes a little bit more detail about what the plan is and the breakdown. But as I said before, we're going to have the regional district support, 9 and 115 for every school district, and then there's the recurring dollars that we will be requesting from the General Assembly to maintain the science of reading. So what does this mean for early literacy, if early literacy coaches are fully funded? And I had to make this slide before we could get all the data squared away with Cynthia Martin and Amy Ryan, but this is a little outdated after the conversation we had this morning. If fully funded, DPI will increase the support of low-performing schools to about 100. That was just including the elementary schools. But because of the support that Amy Ryan's division is going to be able to lend, teaming up with Cynthia Martin's, Dr. Martin's division, we are now going to be able to have an imprint on all 181 low-performing schools for the upcoming school year if this is fully funded. Because we were able to move resources around from the elementary schools that were low-performing to allow for those people to then go to the middle school and high schools. Now, we don't have the district regional support in that, but this will touch all 181 schools for the upcoming school year. And then just inflation, we just talked about fuel costs, but I just want to let the state board know that we will be advocating heavily for increases for all educators, but specifically our teachers and our school support staff, hold on one second, to ensure that with the inflation costs rising, that any raise be substantial enough to at least offset what we're seeing across the nation with inflation. And then you can skip these next two slides. These are for your information later. This is just how everything lines up with board policy and the strategic plan and Operation Polaris and Leandro. And then I did want to let you all know that OSBM did ask for special provisions from us while we were still honing in our budget requests. And I want to let you know that we did send these special provisions over to OSBM to allow for TAs to teachers to be recurring again, but also to allow it so it'd be more of a grant system rather than capped at a certain amount of per district, and then the flexibility for school support staff. And then we've talked enough about all this. And then just making tweaks where necessary as well. Another special provision that we've submitted to OSBM and that we're working with the General Assembly on is a request that the Vice Chair, Duncan, actually was one of the first topic conversations we had last year was with driver's education and increasing the percentage of what the department can do. There's a general statute that states that that the department needs to provide a baseline of curriculum for all the districts, and we're unable to do that with only having 2% reserved. And so we are asking for that to be increased to also offer more support to our driver's education program across the state to provide more equity across the board, because there's a lot of haves and have-nots out there when it comes to driver's education. And then with principal licensure, we discussed that. Dr. Ox and I discussed that recently, and then TAs and teachers, we have submitted that to OSBM. So any questions?
Any questions from anyone? For Jamie with the budget requests coming from DPI at this time? Other than, let me also say this, though, the committee is in full support of the requests coming from the administration as we all try to hone in on these kids who are out here struggling. And you know what I'm saying. I mean, I need to put it any more than that. And I want to thank you. I want to thank you for your presentation, and thank you for them late phone calls and trying to run each other down and things of that nature. But that's the business we chose.
Yes, sir.
That's the business we chose. Okay? Anyone? I thought I saw someone saying.
Well,
Madam Chair.
I would like some clarification, Mr. Falconberry, on when you said that the literacy coaches would free up positions to concentrate on middle and high school. So are you saying that it's possible that some of the districts where we've got district and regional support working would move folks from where they are now to other schools and districts?
That's part of the plan. I think Dr. Martin, if I made sure that I had the all-star team here to go into specific details about that.
So what we did, we looked at the capacity with the 115 early literacy coaches, and so they would assist us in that instructional coaching capacity where it fit. And I believe we identified 35 schools where we could depend on the Office of Early Learning to support that.
That's in the classroom.
That's in the classroom. And that is for literacy, coaching literacy.
So it doesn't really, I mean, it sounds to me like that doesn't mean that you can remove other support from those schools. Is that?
So we don't have instructional coaches at this point. So when these coaches are hired, we can use the ones that we had deemed necessary to cover other schools that may be middle schools or high schools, and depend on those instructional coaches that Dr. Ryan and I identified who fit the needs of the district. So we would depend on them, and they would be able to assist us, and we could use our resources elsewhere where they are needed.
Right, but again, that support from the literacy coaches is just focused on early literacy.
Early literacy at the elementary level, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I think if I could just add a clarifying point. Most districts have an allotment or an FTE who should be doing early literacy work. And so what we're saying when we ask for these coaches is that in what Dr. Ryan shared this morning, is that the research is very clear that if there's not fidelity in this coaching model through OEL, that the outcomes won't be there. And so even though districts already have someone whose title is technically to do this early literacy work, it's not duplicative to have another person per district, because chances are the person is not trained in the science of reading, and they are probably doing other things as well, like math. They're not just doing literacy. They're expected to be perhaps a jack of all trades. So I think that's, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Martin, but I think that's where the idea that you are kind of these Office of Early Learning district coaches will be supplanting the work that may or may not be happening in a district. And that is probably not happening in a way that is aligned with the science of reading at this point, which frees them up to do other work. Am I saying that right, Dr. Martin? Uh-oh.
So, yes, we do have data to show that this is an area where those teachers in those schools, they need this support. What this does is allows us that when we receive these instructional coaches, that we can pinpoint what skill set is needed. We know we have literacy covered, so for those that need traditional pedagogy, you have your beginning teachers, you have those who need math support. We are not having content-specific instructional coaches in this model, but it does give us the opportunity to seek people to match needs with the districts. And Jamie said something about this covers 181. Based on the work that Amy and I did, we are able to cover 99 schools of the 181.
With just the elementary, but then your team will come,
Right,
yes.
exactly.
But then their team will come on and fill the other 82 schools.
With existing staff, is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
How many existing staff are there right now?
You might bring your chair up there.
Also, I would add, we're also requesting, if you,
I'm just trying to understand.
I'm trying too, if I wanted to bring a chair up there.
if you could scroll up too. Part of this request to enhance her team is the additional 8 right here under District and Regional Support Division 2.
So we started out, the State Board of Ed gave us money. We started out with 14. I believe we have, based on the budget bill, the GA said we could increase that to 20, but we didn't have funding. Working with, I believe there is on BizOp, we will be adding 6. And then we have 8 on the short session, so that brings for a total of 28 to support 80 schools and 6 districts.
Leaving no one except the literacy coaches in the 99.
So with the request that's on the docket for BizOp, that will give us our first 4 instructional coaches. Those 8 coaches that we have on the list, those are also instructional coaches. So we will have a full team to support the 6 districts and 80 schools once we receive these 8 positions that are on this list.
Thank you.
But that's for the 80 schools.
Yes.
You have your full team.
For the 80 schools.
Right. And those are the 3 levels that we're talking about.
Those are the 3 levels, and then with the
The Mississippi
assistance
model.
from Dr. Ryan, we are able to expand that based on using the literacy coaches throughout the 181. So it gives us an opportunity to expand based on her manpower.
It's white. Just check. I thought you had something to say. Okay. All right, somewhere I know those numbers that's ain't clicking with me right now for some reason, and I apologize for that. But I still thank you for your report.
Thank you.
I still thank you for your report as we move forward with, especially looking at those 181 chronically low-performing school districts. schools that we have in place. And we'll just continue to massage, because the committee has a recommendation also. We will be presenting a recommendation today that hopefully will go before the full board tomorrow to assist, and so that we can assure ourselves that what we're doing, we're making an impact on the lives of these kids. That's all I want to say about it. But any other questions for Mr. Fortenberry concerning the ask list, we'll call it? Okay? Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
At this time, you have before you, fellow committee members, a hard copy of a recommendation that's coming from the committee to add to this one request that's going before, hopefully will be sent to the state board, to the General Assembly through the state board. I want to start with, on the back of it, I want to start with the social workers. At the back and front. Oh, that's the front. Okay. I want to start with social workers' request. This request is based upon the feeling of social emotional health for our kids throughout the state, but especially in these lowest performing schools that we have in place. Just some brief figures. Suicide is the number 2 killer among school-age kids 10 to 18. Suicide. We know that our children have been through a great deal over the last 2.5 years, or 2 years, when it comes to their social being, their interactions, housing. By the way, we have about 4,000 kids that's lost loved ones. Caretakers, dads, moms, uncles, due to COVID, who are entering our school buildings each and every day, bringing this load on their shoulders and dealing with how to get along, how to act, where do I go. Social workers, we feel, is a key ingredient of the total enhancement of a child's well-being. We know that social workers, not only do they go out and try to find resources for families, but did you know some social workers actually teach in the classroom? They actually hold lessons. And some of my, not people, but principals of the year and the teachers.
Depends on the day.
Okay. Understand, I guess also what we're talking about here when it comes to social workers. The ask coming from the committee is for 115 school district positions at a cost of approximately $15 million. Is our cost factor. And these individuals will be hired from the local level, but we will also give special attention to those chronically low performing schools for this additional support. We just hope that this will help get our kids back in the mode of wanting to hear about reading skills, the science of reading, math skills, you name it. Each day that I hear about a child walking in a school building and the alarm goes off and they found a loaded weapon on that child walking in the school building, that child is having some issues. If that's the reason why they are carrying things like that, and their behavior once they enter into the classroom. Social workers are their image would enhance the process of educating each and every child coming from this committee member. And I would open the floor at any time. We also want to look at the pipeline, similar to the pipeline that we're looking at with school psychologists, running parallel to that particular program, and looking at maybe internships for them also, in order to fill the pipeline with needed social workers. as we move forward, we know that one thing we're gonna have to look at is that pay, the pay scale for social workers. And that's in the long-term session, I would assume, as we look at master's pay and BS degree pay for our social workers. Remember, your master's level social workers, they actually teach courses, not reading and math. That's not what I'm talking about. But how do you sit there and assume the information, consume the information that's being presented to you? We want to, as I said, have it to where the locals will have responsibility on these individuals, these social workers. Let me shut up about social, because I can get on the bandwagon with them. I've spoken to a number of them. I didn't know I had that many down home. But all of a sudden, in my area, I hear more and more and more about the work that they do and how desperately. And by the way, the average social worker is not an 8 to 5. Nowhere near 8 to 5. Sometimes it starts at 7, 6 in the morning and goes to midnight, trying to provide those services that's needed for that child and that child's family. And understand there's a lot of things that go on in the household at 5 o'clock till the next morning that they are experiencing, they are seeing, they are hearing, and in some cases have been inappropriately treated. That the social worker can come in, hopefully, and direct appropriate services for the betterment of that family. Madam Vice Chair.
Yes, sir. You've laid it out beautifully, I think.
Thank you,
This is
ma'am.
such a critical and urgent need right now with what our children are going through.
As soon as I get home, I'm gonna tell my wife that I did something right for a change.
I would emphasize, though, that.
Please do.
We do, even though we are asking for 115 positions, we would be asking, were we to receive those, that the department work on a deployment plan so that they are focused on the most chronically low-performing and highest need districts.
Madam Chair.
So that would imply that you're asking, in order for us to deploy those social workers in the way that you're suggesting, those FTE would need to belong to DPI. The hiring of social workers is a local decision.
Mr. Chairman.
I think what I hear in Ms. Kamnitz is we would appreciate the department's guidance on how to maybe allocate those positions to the districts to hire, like which of the low-performing districts based on characteristics of the students, numbers of social workers already deployed or not deployed. The department would think that these 115 need to go to, one extreme is one per district. I don't advocate for that, but a methodology based on need.
But that would require legislation then in the allocation of the dollars for these FTE.
Okay.
So that would be,
Be part of what that.
that would be there would need to be a bill, I would think, for that.
Okay. And I'm assuming if the board adopts this particular item, then those kind of details, we could work out in part of our conversations with the General Assembly to see if they're receptive to this idea.
Yeah, yeah. I also think that it would be different because we don't typically allocate school support personnel to districts. This is so in other words, with the school psychologist, for asking for flexibility, because not all districts need a school psychologist. They have other needs. We only have about 8 districts. We have about 8 districts right now that do not have any social workers. So, and we have others that have 30 social workers. We don't have data on, we do know that before December, there were about 1,300 social workers, and I think this sheet indicates that, and that about 300 have been hired with federal funds. And there is still $3 billion of federal funds in the districts, 80% of which can be used to hire social workers. So I would just ask the board to consider that when when we know that we have to ask for the early literacy coaches. And to ask for another 115 FTE is an incredibly heavy lift for the department and asks us to deploy resources that we don't have. And this was the recommendation that came from DPI staff, was that we do not have the manpower at the department right now in HR or in financial business services to hire this number of FTE.
Yeah, I don't think our concept here, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Hall, I don't think our concept is for DPI to hire these positions. I think it's for DPI to share the knowledge, an example of what you just shared, that there's 8 districts that don't have any, there's other districts that have plenty, and so that data or that insight could go into this request to the General Assembly to define what deploy based on need, based on school data sets. I think all we're looking to the department for is to provide that data to inform how the district level positions should be distributed across the districts. No hiring
Ms.
required
Schaus,
by the department.
Would you care to address the board to talk about the impact of this number of FTE? Is that okay, Mr. Hall?
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. It would really depend on how this was appropriated as to whether it was appropriated at the DPI level or if it was appropriated as part of the State Public School Fund with an allocation going out to the public schools. So that would be and depending on the conversation here, I'm kind of sort of hearing both on that. So if it was submitted forward as an additional allocation out to the public schools would not be a significant impact on the department. However, if it was held at the department level as part of, say, the district and schools transformation kind of bucket and working with the department, then it would have a significant lift. Is that?
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, that's very helpful.
Anyone else?
Thank
But-
you, Chair.
but
Thanks for
also-
clarifying my question.
But also, fellow board members, those federal dollars in some cases is 2 years to be over, as far as LEAs having resources. And if you heard me last month, you know I kept emphasizing recurring funds, recurring funds, recurring funds. And that's where we are. Everything I see deals with recurring dollars to be there over the long haul. Now, is this gonna be a 1 or 2 year adventure? No. It's gonna be a marathon. We're gonna keep running this race until we can touch each and every child who need to be touched by this program. So your point is well taken, but we're looking what's gonna happen 2 years from now. And by the way, in order to attract in the pipeline some of those individuals that we're talking about, they want job security. I'm not gonna leave a job that I have now and thinking that maybe 2 years from now, the funding might not be there for it. I personally made a mistake one time looking at it that way. I had a lot of offers up front, my eyes were turned green, and I took off, and I got there and things were different after 18 months. But even with that being said, yes, ma'am, Madam Chair.
So I do just want to push back a little bit and say that it's common practice and has been since before Race to the Top to hire people with non-recurring dollars in the hopes that they will become recurring. I think the idea that we leave billions of dollars on the table because we say that we need to ask for this now does not sit well with me. We need to be willing to spend every single dime we have right now. And if we ask for this in the short session, what we're saying is that we're going to leave billions of dollars on the table. So there's still $19 million in gear funds as well just for mental health supports. And so it doesn't strike me as strategic or fiscally responsible to, in a short session, when we've got money to move us even past the next long session, to make this ask now. My preference would be to, we don't really know, knowing that we've hired 300 more social workers, we don't even know what the need is right now. Can anyone tell me right now what the exact number is that we need? And I just don't know the answer to that question. So 300 have been hired with federal dollars, which is a lot over the last year. And if we need to have a better understanding as a department about what the personnel challenges are in each of the districts, because I don't know what they are right now. And in continuing to expect that districts will use their 80% of that $3 billion for FTE and school support personnel. Again, some of them may need nurses instead of social workers, which they can hire. Then we go into the long session with a plan. We have no plan for a social work pipeline right now the way we do with a psychologist pipeline. The psychologist pipeline was there is no social worker counterpart to the psychology pipeline, just sitting there waiting to be utilized. It's two totally different things. And so what I advocate for is coming up with a solid plan that is as solid as the plan we have for early literacy coaches, that we know, and I would say the same, I know we're going to get there, but the same for hiring coaches for low-performing schools. We need to know exactly what the district's needs are, the individual districts. Thank you.
You're welcome, ma'am.
So I would say we do have some idea of what the needs are for social workers. The national ratios would suggest that there should be one for every 250 students. We don't come close to meeting that, and I don't think in the foreseeable future we will.
No one does.
But we're at over 5 times that. We're at 1 out of every roughly 1,300 to 1,400 students for social workers. And that can vary widely from district to district, which is one of the points that's been made. So we do know there's a significant need for social workers, and we do know that our children have, and you have spoken so eloquently about this on many occasions, our kids are in need, and they have suffered badly through this. And we need our social workers to help alleviate some of that suffering during this time. This really is a time of need. So many people around this table and in this room work so thoughtfully, with such compassion to try to help children in need. And we all feel that, I think. And this is a place where we can support and need to support. Our districts, our superintendents are very supportive of this. And I think districts, I think they have to be appropriately cautious. We've heard in this room now referred to numerous times, we have to watch for the cliff. We all know what the cliff is. So districts that are just spending all their money right this second have more than 2 years, roughly have 2.5 years to go to commit the money, and some spending can take place after that. It would not be wise to spend all the money right now, particularly when if it's non-recurring dollars, you cannot get your most attractive employees and you can't get the best employees in. So trying to sit in the schools, in the shoes of a district, you want to be thoughtful about how you space out the dollars. You also want to try to get as many employees as you can that you know are going to have long-term needs you want to get on recurring dollars. So I appreciate all the points that you made, and I think there are some counterbalancing issues that we all have to think through and bring as you're trying to do, bring a balanced perspective to all this. And so I will say that I will support this need because I think it's a significant need. I don't think it should be the department having to hire 115 FTEs. I agree with your comment about that completely. I don't think that's the way to go about it. Getting guidance from the department about what the best allotments would be is a different story. That would be important, and I think a great service. The department has a lot of knowledge and could really help on this. So, and in terms of a pipeline, I think that affirmatively we should be working to develop that same pipeline, and I know you do, and I think that should be, part of what we're doing. So I do think, we're in agreement in a lot of ways. We're just talking around a difficult issue. So I'm trying to bring that thought to this discussion.
And I'm not denying the need. What I'm saying is that right now the ratio in CMS is actually 1 to 1,000. So that's a huge need. But what I am saying is that we need to know the ratios do, as you said, vary greatly from place to place. We have, as I said, about 7 or 8 districts that have 0 social workers. And so we could do something, I think, I would feel very confident in asking for something that's more targeted towards certain districts. But I think where we're disagreeing is whether or not it's, we agree that there's a need, we agree on the significance of the need, or the level of the need. We just disagree on the timing and whether or not districts, especially given the fact that our current data doesn't take into account the 300 who were just hired, I need to understand better how many, even if we did get this, do we have the social workers right now to fill the pipeline, or is this going to turn into a big reversion, which is my fear.
Well, and none of us want a big reversion for obvious reasons. I think a couple of things about that. I think we can't leave this discussion without acknowledging that, at least in the long session, having masters in social workers positions is going to become an important discussion in payment for that, because they can actually provide, they're licensed to provide therapy, counseling services, which a social worker without a master's is not licensed to provide. Our kids desperately need that, as important as our school psychologists are. And I think a lot of people think that's what they do, is provide counseling services to students. That's a limited part of what they're able to do because of the IEP requirements that they're essential to. And that's important for the welfare of our students, because those students need to be placed properly and need to be getting the proper educational plan for them. So these all, as you know, all too well, these all fit together closely. So I do think that we need these positions. I think I think that we will have to, probably the districts will have to work hard to get people into the positions, but they'll have to work a lot less hard if they're recurring state dollars in a position that provides a future for those folks. So those are just offering some additional thoughts. I appreciate the discussion.
I did reach out to our social work consultant, who has shared that the cost for providing current social workers a master's degree would be about $650,000 to get them up to the master's pay.
And the opening of the door, if you will, for being able to hire people who already have a master's in social work, who may well be interested in coming into our schools if it offers the potential for a future employment that is not limited in time. So.
Okay. Dr. Oxendine.
The discussion we're having is a good one. I would imagine I know there is a high school in my district right now who probably has called to the school. At least one or several members from the student support staff. Jack Britt High, I just have a text message. Jack Britt High, which is in Cumberland County, had a suicide this morning. High school student committed suicide. Very sad.
Sad situation. Anyone else concerning this issue concerning the request for additional social workers? That is the committee's recommendation, and yes, Madam Superintendent, your comments are well received. Are well received. Regardless, we're just trying to figure out how we're gonna get there at the same time. The road less traveled, which one we're gonna take. Okay. Moving on with, and I think Madam Superintendent, I've already heard you comment on our transformation team and filling that out, and your point is well taken. I don't know if you want to repeat any of that, but I think we all got the message first time out.
Well, this does have a direct impact on the department. And I've had multiple conversations with directors and with Ms. Schaus about the impact on the department at these additional requests. And I feel that we've presented a plan that will allow us to, again, come back in the long session when we've been implementing this model with our 81 schools in a way that we can show the General Assembly that the model is solid. Because you all know that we haven't had a chance, because we haven't had the funding, to fully enact this model. And it gives me great trepidation to think that we are going to jump from supporting 81 schools to 180 schools when we don't know if we have what we need to support the 81 schools. It's not the model itself that we're calling into question, it's that we, the team that's currently in place, has not yet implemented the model in our chronically low-performing schools.
Is the model fully funded now?
No.
No.
We're asking.
We're asking, right.
What we're asking for, what the department is advocating for, is that we, in the short session, ask to fully fund the model for 80 schools.
80 schools, right.
Yes.
And the other 100, wait until?
Well, in terms of asking for another 51 positions that would be doing what we would get funded in the short session, to complete the model, we would want to ask for those in the long session. But in the meantime, what Dr. Ryan and Dr. Martin have proposed is that we leverage what we hope will be 115 Office of Early Literacy consultants to support 181 schools. It's not perfect, but to me, it's a middle road for again what's going to be we don't have the infrastructure at the department to put a model in place to support 181 people. We don't have the HR staff to hire those people, plus the 115 that we think we're going to get for literacy, and we don't have the human capital within Dr. Martin's division to support another 51 consultants.
Okay, thank you for your words. Again, Madam Superintendent. So all will know what we're talking about. We're talking about adding another 50, requesting another 51 turnaround transformational coaches for in the classroom for these 181 low-performing schools. To fill out the complete model would take 51 more employees. I just happen to think we can get them. I just happen to think we can. I don't know how my fellow board members feel about it, but I want to see those schools get something now.
I do too.
Now.
I do too, sir, but my department
understand.
is telling me.
I understand. I hear you loud and clear. I hear you loud and clear. I wish I could do something about that, but it's out of my wheelhouse.
Me too.
It's out of my wheelhouse. But anyway, that's the discussion, and it's a good discussion, because you know what we're talking about? Children. An investment today that we will see tomorrow, hopefully. And I appreciate that, but anyone else? Anyone have any questions or concerns about the request to move forward with the 51 additional employees for the transformational group to close it out completely? So you will have an understanding, because tomorrow it comes to us for a vote. Do I hear anyone? Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hall, I do have one comment. So I appreciate the discussion, and I appreciate the fact that we can discuss a matter
Yes.
or matters as challenging as these are with a difference of opinion, and do so in a constructive manner. So offer that thanks. I also want to add that actually a lot of the things that are in Mr. Falconberry's presentation, as well as these two complementary pieces to that, are part of our comprehensive remedial plan. And just to refresh everyone's memory, the board is named as the party in that particular matter. And the board worked on, developed, and support the comprehensive remedial plan. So that's also a basis for these recommendations. But even further, I think the board's past support for the comprehensive remedial plan indicates that we would call on the General Assembly and the governor to work together to figure out how to fully fund year 3 of that plan. I mean, that would overshadow all this discussion we just had, because it fulfills these discussions. And I believe the board has conveyed a number of times its support for the plan, and it'll take our executive and legislative branches getting together to support that. So I think that would be the overriding objective of our request.
Would that be part of our?
Yeah, I think we should consider that. So maybe that's up for discussion now. But I would offer that as a point of our ask from the board.
I would just reiterate one more time that I'm not quibbling about the money. I'm saying, I'm asking the board to think about, does the department have the capacity to set the state, our districts, our schools, our students up for success? And what my team is telling me is no. That's what, this is not a lot of money that we're in the grant, it's not.
Agreed.
That's not the issue.
Yeah, 165, 166 positions is not a lot of positions.
Right.
Would you, I have to ask this. Is there any way you could reorganize at your level to handle some of this?
Perhaps if I could rephrase Mr. Hall's question. We acknowledge the challenges.
Yeah.
Because they're not recent challenges. But what we do look for, and I know we've discussed this, is, well, what's the plan to address those? And I know your team's working incredibly hard on it. There is no doubt.
That's why we presented the plan today, to get us through to the long session. We are looking at reorganizing, and what we've tried to do is to be cross-functional so that we can maximize our resources. So you're absolutely right to ask that question, and I can tell you with 100% certainty that we are thinking the same way. We're just limited in the extent to which we can reorganize.
I thank you for that, and being so diplomatic with that too.
I think it's not an either or, it's both and. And by that, I mean that we have consensus about the need for additional intervention at the school level through social workers. So I think the board stands united with the department. But I'm wondering if 6 months and pushing this particular request to the long session, if we already have 300 folks that are going to be deployed, that we don't know what the impact is, and we have additional dollars on the table, that hitting the pause button on that particular ask, simply because we want to be wise stewards of the federal funds that have been given. 19 million, did you say?
3 billion.
Three
Plus
bill-
19 million.
And I heard you when you said non-recurring, so one shot, but an additional 6 months pause isn't gonna make that big of a difference when we're talking about really making a statewide plan for intervention for student health services. And so, I like to bake, and I like to make chocolate icing for my cakes, and one of the things that gives the most significant pause is when I stick a bowl that has chocolate icing in the sink, and I turn that water in and it's gone. So I want to make sure with fidelity and authenticity that when we make an ask to our friends in the General Assembly, that we say, we need this because we have spent every last dollar at our discretion to make this happen. And when we have $3 billion at our discretion that we haven't used, it sort of makes us look like not good fiscal managers. Just in addition, just a pause to the next. But again, we are united in the need for social workers in our schools. So please, if anything, the soundbite that happens, we're united in wanting to make sure that our students have the mental health services that they need.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ms. White, and I appreciate this comment. My understanding is that $3 billion and $19 million has a lifetime. It hasn't already been spent because it's got to be used over a 2 to 3 year period of time, which I think is the argument. I get that. So it's not reasonable to expect it all to have been spent today.
That's not what we're saying.
So, but at some point it will run out, and what we're facing right now, we understand, is that the ability to hire, back to the social, let's just differentiate. The ability to hire social workers is dependent on a competitive salary for extended period of time. An uncompetitive salary for short term leads to not being able to fill positions. So that's on the transformation side. I totally get that the department is before we started talking about the instructional coaches or the transformation was already facing difficulties in filling positions. Non-competitive salaries that are beyond, in many ways, the department's control, and other issues that are making it challenging to fill department positions. And now we're adding 115 instructional coaches and potentially 51 more. So I've heard the challenge.
Well, our department challenges, those are recurring dollars. It's a challenge because they're underfunded. But we think 300 social workers were hired with short-term dollars since December.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not having trouble hiring social workers with short-term dollars.
Yeah, I think the question is, how much could they have hired had they had recurring dollars and a competitive salary? It's hard to predict that.
I wish I knew the answer.
But the ratios clearly show that 300 or 115 is just an initial step to filling the need.
Well, and the ratios are averages. We would certainly want high poverty schools to have more social workers.
Right.
And again, I would love to have a spreadsheet that tells me there's just not enough time. I think that's part of the problem. If we had another 2 months, we could come up with a great plan that we could feel good about going to them with, but it's a time crunch.
Agreed, it is time, and if we don't act now in the short session, we're not putting it off just a couple months. We're putting it off at least a year. Who knows when the next long session will be approved? And that would just be to get us started hiring. So that's the other side of the time argument, is that if we don't act now, we essentially lose a year.
Well, if the budget's passed the same time it got passed this year, we lose 2 years.
Yes, Superintendent Truitt, you've said that it's hard to, maybe you don't have I don't know about the mechanism for determining or identifying the needs of the districts. How could you go about doing that, gathering that type of data from school districts in terms of needs of personnel, needs of whatever is necessary to have a high-flying school district and great schools. How can your department access that data?
So I have a spreadsheet in front of me right now that tells me exactly how many social workers each district has that are funded by the state and funded by local and funded by federal. And that's how I know that there are about 7 districts that have no social workers. So we do collect this data. We would just need to run something that we would have to determine, I would want to reach out to each central office and say, how many more do you need?
That seems like a reasonable question and approach to do that.
Right.
Through your superintendent's council, I would imagine. There you go.
I would suspect that your response would be quite rapid on that because they have, they know what they need.
Ready to answer.
And in all due respect, the word pause just gives me heartburn because we just, to your point, if we don't do this now and ask for this, there's no guarantee we're gonna get the full funding that we're asking for, but anything we get is going to make a difference in our schools. And we just heard from Dr. Oxendine in Cumberland County what just happened. We don't have time. We don't have time to wait. These children have needs now.
Mr. Chairman, anyone else? This is a recommendation coming from the committee. We will bring it forth tomorrow, and hopefully, a decision will be made one way or the other with. And, you know, it's all about the children, and we've all seen it. I mean, we just keep saying it. But I want to thank you for this discussion, and we'll just see. If anybody has anything else you want to say, please, I'm here until tomorrow or whatever. You can share with me, with Jill, and of course with the administration that's sitting up here, if you have any concerns. Thank you so much. But at this time, Mr. Chairman,
I think you have a new business item?
that's what I'm going to.
Great.
I've been waiting on this one.
Good.
We have one new business item before us this afternoon, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Wallace. Is he? No, Ms. Bell. That's right. Then Wallace comes. Right.
Well, good afternoon, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Truitt, board members, and advisors. I am honored to be here today to share an update on our promising practices work. You can go to the next slide. That our friend, and honored to be here on behalf of my friend and colleague, Dr. Angie Mullinex. You have the link here on this slide to our clearinghouse. And you can click on that image and explore the growing work that we're doing in the Promising Practices Clearinghouse. Because Dr. Mullinex has had some unforeseen events that have slowed some of the reporting of this work down, I did speak with her this morning, and she asked me to share with you that it takes a village to get this work done, and several of our colleagues have been pitching in to make a lot of this work accessible. And the updated webpage should be up to date by the end of next week, so you should be able to see everything up to date by the end of next week. Today is very exciting because Dr. Mullinex and I both love the work of authentic learning, or you may know a lot of this work around project-based learning. And it is truly why we as educators do what we do, and you'll see how it works today. So in Henderson County, the Henderson County Career Academy, alongside their project-based approach to learning, they are also teaching true life skills, whole child concepts, which are completely authentic for our students in the learning atmosphere. They have something that Dr. Mullinex said really stood out to her alongside a lot of the work that they're doing on the campus of Blue Ridge Community College is that they have laundry machines on site. And so our students can address their personal needs, learn life skills alongside their academic skills every single day. Voyager Academy is a well-rounded project-based learning charter school. Prior to COVID, they celebrated their unit completions with family and friends at the school. During COVID, they didn't let those celebrations stop, but moved them virtually. And so not only did family from within the household were they able to participate in those, but grandparents, cousins, other family members from all across the country could also participate in those celebrations of learning for our students. And they're now taking that and continuing that now, so they're expanding their celebrations to the whole support system of each child, both near and far, which is really exciting for everybody to be able to see and hear the great learning that's happening with each of their students. Yadkin Valley Regional Career Academy is a cooperative, innovative high school focused on project-based learning and where students can get college credit and certifications, effectively personalizing learning for each student and setting them on a path for continued learning and employment opportunities right out of high school. And then Foothills Community School, the principal, who I believe was just named the superintendent for Hyde County Schools, shows how leaders who are not afraid to take the right kinds of risks create teachers who are not afraid to take the right kinds of risks for student learning and growth, obviously creating students who are supported in taking academic risks, generating an impact on their school and community. And then one final school that's not actually on here is Evergreen Community Charter in the Asheville area, and it's an experiential charter that focuses on outdoor living and holistic education. They take pride in teaching kids to work for what they want. So if they want to focus on better nutrition, they learn how to build a garden, they raise farm animals, so they really learn things from the ground up. All these schools are teaching students that if you want to do something, you can work hard for it and achieve potential and beyond. These students are not only learning, but they can also articulate what they are learning and why they are learning, generating true purposeful instructional atmosphere. They're truly taking ownership of what they learn and driving their own instruction. This promising practice highlights that authentic, project-based learning yields high-achieving performance and growth for students, staff, school, proving that you can shift your perspective on instructional practices and create incredible outcomes for students and teachers. It's just a really incredible high-level highlight of what some of this authentic learning is happening in our schools and our districts across the state. Now, I will turn it over, with your permission, to my colleague, Tabari Wallace, unless there are
Before
questions.
you leave, I need to say this. Last week, I think it was, I had the opportunity to speak to a group of board members and educators about the website, the interactive website.
The Clearinghouse website?
The Clearinghouse. And they were, 2 or 3 of them had already been there.
Yeah.
And they were really pleased and wanted to know, would it be more added? And of course, the answer was yes, over time.
Yes.
So I want to thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you to Dr. Mullinex and her team, the team of folks who are really doing that work. It's truly incredible. And we did have a conversation this morning about not only is this Clearinghouse a place where people can go and click on places and find things that are working in other districts that they want to find out more information about, but our next goal that we talked about is planning how to create some scalable instructional opportunities to bring to the AIM conference so that districts from across the state can not only see what's happening from the Clearinghouse, but learn from those folks face to face and be able to implement them in their own districts.
Great, thank you. Good job.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Definitely want to take the time to thank Mr. Falkenberry. We asked him to switch today and allow us to go last and he to go first, but I want to tell you, Chair Hall, I don't think I'll ever ask Mr. Falkenberry to do that again. I'm going to tell you. But first, we're going to be discussing the Principal Summit, and the Principal Summit was put on by the North Carolina Principal Advisory Committee, and this was actually created out of a need for immediate feedback to inform legislative, state board, and DPI policy and directives prior to it being deployed into the field. And this is an opportunity for us to connect and maintain an open line of communication with the Office of the State Superintendent and North Carolina's elite principals. Our purpose is to cultivate the opportunities for professional connections in North Carolina, where we inform, support, and inspire the trajectory of school leaders. Now, the PowerPoint that you're seeing right here is when we all gathered. I think that's the That's the second slide. The first slide is when we all gathered for our principal summit, when we had everybody to come in person. We've been meeting online. And in order to become a member of the North Carolina I've been working on them, those applications too long, Superintendent Truitt, but that's all I keep seeing is parent advisory. But their principal advisory committee, you have to be a North Carolina Principal of the Year, okay? A North Carolina State Principal of the Year. And we have the 2022 Regional Principals of the Year. All of those are in service right now. And our advisors have to have extensive knowledge in areas that will develop or support the enhancement of the principalship. So during our principal summit, we covered such topics like portrait of a graduate, our perceived learning gap with our children, advanced teacher roles. You'll be amazed how many principals do not understand that, has never heard of it. Promising practices, teacher engagement, and when we say that, we actually working with Julie Pittman and definitely getting the principal's role in recruitment and retention. That's the biggest factor, as there is, that the culture of the building and the retention of teachers. We also had the Friday Institute here who wanted feedback regarding digital blended learning. There's some things they're trying to do next school year. And then this culminated as we ventured over to the General Assembly, and what was supposed to be a 30-minute tour of the General Assembly turned into almost 2 hours. We were supposed to end at 12, and we didn't leave here until 2 o'clock because there was so much interest once we got over there. And we've definitely kind of carpe diem in regards to that. I want to give John Bell, Steve Tyson, Representative John Torbett, and Senator Michael Lee a shout out up here this morning this afternoon, because they really took care of us when we got over there. And we have been in touch since. So that working relationship is still ongoing, and as well as the people in the department that assisted in that endeavor. The biggest thing that we've let out so far and we've distributed through the field is the 5 top issues facing principals for the year 2022. And that is human capital, the mental health status of teachers and students, testing and accountability, flexibility, and principal compensation. And I will tell you, an honorable mention is the learning loss. Okay, how do we accelerate mending or closing that learning gap that has existed from the pandemic? All right, and if you want more, and I'm kind of trying to make up some time here, so I'm going through it pretty quick, but if you want an in-depth view of the North Carolina Principal Advisory Committee, I direct you no further than the Ed&C. They did a great article for Nationals Principals Month. It was on a Sunday, go figure. So I think they got celebrated on Monday, same day we started the Teacher Appreciation Week. But they did an in-depth article, did a great job. Ruben did a great job of what he did. And so I can send it to you via email. I got tons of copies. So if you want it, I can send it to you. But I just want to make sure that you know that we are an item. We will be working hard this summer. We have a new initiative we started off on yesterday. And before I move to the next topic, I want to tell you how we solidified our existence. We were called together to inform the House Bill 82. We were told to look at the unreleased law and, would it work in schools? And when we looked at it, we called it, we got all together in the summer during that, and we supplied that feedback. And then we were called again for the stakeholder group with Tom Tomlin to inform licensure and what we wanted to do with licensure. So I had my one-to-one with Superintendent Truitt, and I said, well, Superintendent Truitt, I think our work is done. I'm going to disband the group. She says, no, you're not. I said, huh? She said, no, you're not. You got a good thing going here, Tabar. Let's keep it going. That is a great group you got. And so now we are an item. We had a meeting with Dr. Oxendine yesterday, and they were starstruck. They were, I said, man, y'all can talk. It's Dr. Oxendine. She's here to talk to you. But they were starstruck. They didn't want to say anything. Keisha and everybody was on the call. So I just wanted to say, so if we could be of any assistance in the future, we're here. We meet every month. So we're definitely at your beck and call. Okay. Any questions before I go on to the next item? Anything?
Go right ahead.
Sure. Okay. All right. We do have 4 great people that traveled way from Charlotte this afternoon. All right. I told them 2 o'clock, and they kept looking. Y'all ever been in church and they keep looking down at you as time goes? I said, just let them get it out, y'all. We're good. This is good work. We're doing good work in here today. And that's Tracy Pickard, James Fanasto. Boy, that's good. That's graduation practice right there, boy. Meredith Luber and Daryl Kelly. Okay, they traveled all the way here from Charlotte. It is Hopewell High School's dads and moms on a mission. Okay, We discussed this a couple of state board meetings where it was kicked around, and so I went down. The best way to learn about something is to experience it in person. So we went down to Charlotte and paid a visit. And as with most educational institutions, the pandemic created some unexpected consequences in the school. A week into the school year at Hopewell, an altercation and violence outside the school found its way into the halls of Hopewell, resulting in the loss of life of one of their students. Okay. A few days later, another altercation in the community involving former and current students of Hopewell. And a couple of weeks later, there were 2 weapons that was brought on campus and that was found, which culminated in what you heard with the book bag push in CMS with the clear book bags. I was actually there when they sent the first shipment and they were labeled wrong and they had to send them back. But the staff, students, and the community were definitely voicing that we had to do something. And the traditional means of addressing what was going on were untenable. They had to think outside of the box, and that's why we got great leaders like Tracy Pickard to think outside of the box. The call to action started with a meeting of 62 moms and dads convening to accept the call to serve. 62, okay? After learning about the intricate needs of the student body no longer resting on the school staff, we learned of the power of parents, and therein comes school moms and dads. Since December 1st and the implementation of this program, they have experienced a 39% decline, okay, in acts of violence and absolutely no weapons on campus. The community at large shares a partnership and is empowered. If they see something, they say something, okay? And that's getting parents involved. Y'all, when I got there, I walked in, Principal Pickard was in a conference, and you kind of just stand in the hallway. You know, if you're a principal, you can feel what's going on there. Look at my PO guys over there. They know. You can feel the culture in the school. If you just stand and look, didn't ask any questions. They were intentional about positivity and relationship building. It wasn't just walking around. Now, the 2 dads that I met, you know, one was a former ECU football player. I mean, he was swole. And he had the tight shirt on, too, with the. So he's walking around swole now. So they walking around. So I saw the parents. I knew who they were when I saw them. I said, "Can I walk with y'all?" They was like, "Yeah." So we started walking around, and to see them go and talk with the kids, to see how the kids responded to them. It wasn't just a formal hey and bye. They were asking, you know, how was it last night? How's your mama? Calling the mama by name. They knew the kids intimately. And I looked at Principal Pickett. I said, well, what's the secret? How did you get it turned so fast? She said, "Mr. Wallace, I love my children. Some of these kids don't got nowhere else to go. If it's not for us, then who?" And to hear a leader say that is huge. And then to see it in action, to see it in the hallways, to see the redirection of babies, not only do you correct the behavior, but you build them back up afterwards. It says something. And that's why I asked them to be here today. They didn't stop with that. They had a Zen room. If you go to the next slide, the second picture right there at the bottom, y'all ought to see this room. And she didn't ask the Board of Education for help. She didn't ask for anything. They did it, the parents and the school community, they did it themselves, where they can go in and practice multi-purpose, for multi-purpose reasons, meditations, they can study, they lounge, yoga. It's just a mental health reboot for the babies. Culture drives performance, y'all. And what the law says is we must keep children safe prior to educating them. And this group that we got here today is a true illustration of that tenet. Ms. Pickard, would you please come on up with your team and address it?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you. We are very thankful to be here. Chairman Davis, it's great to see you again. Superintendent Truitt, thank you. And Chair of this committee, Mr. Hall, it's a pleasure to meet you. And I see Mr. Floyd, another CMS colleague. It's good to see you, and to the State Board of Education. We are thankful to be here. I am Tracy Pickard, and I'm the principal at Hopewell High School. I'm a 26-year educator and have been at Hopewell since October 2018. I have with me some amazing, my assistant principal Jim Van Alsdahl, and two of our awesome Titan moms and dads that will briefly, we just want to give you a snapshot of who we are and what we're about. Hopewell is located in Huntersville, North Carolina. We have about 1783, depending on the day. We can get up to 1,800. You know how that goes. Very diverse student population. First, North Carolina high school to bring the Cambridge program. Very excited about what the difference that's making in our classrooms. We're an Avid school, really working hard to reboot Avid in our school. Solid CTE programs that we're re-innovating to meet the needs of our kids. Award-winning band, and super, super excited about our ROTC program. And we just continue to try to meet our kids with opportunities. Of course, post-COVID, we had to find a way to reimagine school. As Mr. Wallace described to you, we did not intend starting our school with vacancies and just the numerous absences of our staff based on their needs within their families. Our admin team was super committed. We did not ask teachers to cover, so we had to go back to our old school days of being in the classroom, and we had kids in the cafeteria and committed to trying to keep teachers focused on teaching. And we were doing some of the work to support our kids where there were vacancies and gaps. So we didn't have that intention to start our school year. So that brought about some other gaps in our school. And as a result of that, as he has shared, we experienced some unrest in our school. It was very emotionally stressful. I think we're still kind of regrouping from some of the trauma that happens when a school and a community goes through that. But the beauty in all of it is that we didn't just have a pity party and stay in the pit. We knew we had to move into action to meet the needs of our students. And what an amazing impact we are seeing as a result of our Titan Moms and Dads on a Mission, and now our Zen Den experience. It is truly transforming our community. It is transforming our kids. When I see our students, even just yesterday, Ms. Pickard, that was a great thing you did bringing that Zen Den to school. And this was launched as a result of a student coming to my office basically saying, I just need a place to talk. We found ourselves really, I'm a former school counselor, elementary teacher, so my counseling I have to try to keep balance, but I find myself oftentimes just being an ear for our students and a shoulder. And then this particular time, she was just one of our high-performing kids, just really stressed, carrying a lot of anxiety. She said, I just need a place where I can decompress, where I can talk. And that launched our Zen Den idea. So with the help of parents, we put that in motion with our Titan Moms and Dads that was already in action as a result of us recognizing our students needed something different. I had seen in the past, Charlotte had a program, New Year's Eve. There were men in orange jackets a few years ago walking around the city, just having a presence. I remember my husband being a part of that. I said, why can't we bring something like that to our school? And after that, if you remember hearing about Dads on Duty in Louisiana from a high school, I reached out to that person. They didn't answer, but that's okay. We're still going to get it done in North Carolina. And that's what we did. We changed the name, and we used our own creativity, and it is making a huge impact. And I'm not going to tell the story. I'm going to let Mr. Van Alsdahl and Ms. Meredith and Mr. Kelly share personally what they're witnessing and seeing as a result of these initiatives. And I once again thank you for your service to us and support of us. And I hope after today you'll see just the impact that's happening in our schools. Thank you again.
Good afternoon again. My name is Jim Van Alsdahl. I'm one of the proud assistant principals at Hopewell High School. No spelling test with my last name afterwards. But I've been at Hopewell for 8 years, and I'm very proud to say that. Been in the Huntersville, North Carolina community where we've received a lot of support. The core of our work at Hopewell, and it's why I continue to work there, is relationships. Our belief is that until we have a strong relationship, and every kid in our building can say that they have a strong relationship, whether it be with a mom, dad, coach, pastor, someone, that learning cannot take place. place, or at least effective and productive learning. So at the core of what we do is how do we build those strong relationships. And before I turn it over to these two phenomenal parents who are boots on the ground and the real reason that this has taken off, I just wanted to share some of the other things that have kind of resulted from our Zen Den and Titans Moms and Dads on a Mission, because we have a lot of groups in our school and a lot of staff members that are working hard. One of the big things we do is we do 2 surveys each year with our students. It's called the Panorama Survey. Some of you are probably familiar with this. And one of the big things we started off our year noticing was our students do not have a strong sense of self-efficacy. In fact, about a quarter of our students report a strong sense of that. So one of the things we implemented was a Wellness Wednesday and social emotional learning block, where we have structured lessons, activities, some guest speakers, some pull-out sessions with targeted groups of students based off needs that they have. I'm happy to report now, after our last Panorama survey, we've increased that to about 40%. Still a lot of work to be done, but growth is growth, and we'll take it after this school year. I'm happy to report that about 80% of our students now feel that they have a positive relationship with adult in our building. And that's thanks to our moms, dads, staff members, and things like that. We have a group of about 30 young men, motivating minds, that meet monthly with our behavior modification technician and other support staff to talk about their feelings. Because students have shared one of their other challenges is, I don't know what to do when I'm feeling a certain way, whether it be suicidal, anger, hungry, hopeless, desperate, whatever it may be. So how do we focus on those feelings? And how do we tie that group of students, particularly boys, with a strong member in our school that can support them? Most recently, they've brought in someone from the boxing community. The boys shared they want to learn how to box. How do I take out my anger? So we started a group most recently, how do we bring in someone from the community who's a boxer? And we're actually going to go visit that facility and let the boys learn how to box, because they really don't know how. That's something we learned. The other thing I want to report is that we have over 300 students that are now trained in what's called QPR. We have had a significant number of students that have either attempted suicide or have had suicidal ideations. And QPR stands for question, persuade, and refer. We've had the majority of our athletes go through the training. We've had a lot of our staff members go through the training, and just other student leaders. And the basis of the program is that, what do I know? How do I know what to do when my friend comes to me and feels a certain sort of way? Because we know that students usually go to their peers. And how do we train teachers? Because we know a lot of times the math teacher may find out before the parent. And that's a tough conversation for a parent to have. I'm a parent myself. But we know that in schools, that when we build those strong relationships, students are more apt to go to one of their peers, their coaches, or their teachers. And so how do we train as many individuals as we can to get those students the help that we need? And as a result of that, we've been able to partner with a local counseling organization that's going to partner with CMS next year to come in and support our families. So as a mom or dad, how do I work through when my child is struggling with those feelings at home? Or how do I work through conflict resolution with my child at home? And so really bringing in all those agencies and different pieces to the puzzle to help support this effort. Our Zen Den and Moms and Dads on a Mission, it has really made a huge impact. And there's a young man that Mrs. Pickett and I see regularly. I've worked with him for 3 years now. And he's challenging to get through to. He is. He's one of the more challenging young men that I've worked with. But he came in Miss Pickett's office one day, and we were having a heart-to-heart talk, I think it was, about his grades. And out of the clear blue, he just said, "That's really cool, the Dads on a Mission that you brought in." And Mrs. Pickett and I kind of looked at each other, and we were just like, this came out of nowhere. It was actually Mr. Kelly who he was talking about. But he said, "It's really cool. I finally feel like I have someone to talk to that doesn't judge me." And so that's why these two individuals are here, because their work speaks volumes with what they've done. And so I'm going to introduce Ms. Luber first, Ms. Meredith, to speak a little bit about the Zen Den, and then Mr. Kelly. And once again, thank you for your time.
Hi, my name is Meredith, and I'm one of 4 Zen Den moms, and I'm the proud mom of 1,800 kids. And I love each and every one of them so dearly. One of them I actually birthed. So the kids need to be seen, they need to be heard, they need to feel valued, they need to be loved. And after being this little tiny box on a screen for 2.5 years, they need connection. They need to know how to build relationships. Their brains are still developing, and they've missed out on that. So they just need some support. So in the Zen Den, I'm a yoga instructor, a certified yoga instructor, and when Ms. Pickard came to me, I just wanted to help. I want to be part of the solution to help these kids. And so in the Zen Den, we offer meditation, we offer yoga, we offer breath work, we offer different coping strategies that they can self-explore how to relax and regulate their nervous system. Because a lot of that is their nervous system gets triggered, and then it's very hard to get through to them when their nervous system is triggered and they're in fight, flight, or freeze. So we're giving them strategies on when they start to feel triggered, what can we do to bring that down? And then you're able to make healthier decisions for yourself. So the kids come, and I call them my kiddos, forgive me, that's just what I call them. So the kiddos come in, and sometimes they want to talk. Sometimes they want to try a relaxation technique or breath work. We have self-explore stations, such as making a positive affirmation bracelet, or doing mindful coloring, or they might work with a fidget. We might even practicing some trimmering, which releases some of the built-up tension they might be feeling from a really stressful day. It's a nice time of day just to reset. They might be having an anxiety attack that's coming on, so they can come and sit in one of our comfortable chairs. We'll put a weighted blanket on them, put the noise-canceling earphones on, and we'll sit with them and work with them on their breath. And then if they just need to release, vent. They can vent to us because we're moms. That's what we do. We just listen, and we support, and we love them. And it's just that connecting with the kids, and also the kids that are really lonely. Maybe they came into our school when we were remote and they don't have many friends. They actually start seeing some of their classmates in there working on things. And these kids are working so hard. And how brave are they? They're so brave to try something new. Some of these kids do not have much exposure to these types of things, and they're doing it, and they're trying, and they're making a difference. I had a student that came in the other day and said, I'm starting to feel myself escalate, and I don't want to get frustrated and take it out in the wrong way, so I'm going to come in here. Will you help me? Absolutely. What a great choice. And we applaud them. I'm so proud of you for coming in. I'm so proud of you for doing this. So just giving those affirmations to them, and we give a lot of hugs for the kids that want them. So we have the lights really low for our kids that we try to meet every single student. So I have a student that comes in every single day that's on the spectrum, and the lunchroom is way too stimulating for their nervous system, and they were actually eating in the bathroom. So now they come into the Zen Den and they decompress, and the other day the kiddo is not able to smile very frequently, and the kiddo came and said, "Will you do yoga with me?" and smiled. I like the Zen Den. So it was really, we're seeing some really powerful stories, and I could go on, but it's really exciting, and I'm so grateful to Ms. Tracy and Mr. V for allowing us to have this special space for the kids, a safe place for them to come and reset. Thank you.
Wow. Good evening. Thank you guys so much for giving us the opportunity to come and speak about what we do. As you heard from Meredith, she's more the nurturer type, and that's what, excuse me, Mom, that's what you do. I'm a father, and my job is to train, practice, study. And if you, any athletics, Coach, you understand this, practice is not fun. So that's what I tell my son. Let your mother go do the nurturing, and I'm going to do the training. So when I initially heard about this, I thought about, okay, what can I do? And selfish reasons, my son attended Hopewell's. He's been in the band. He's been in ROTC, and I've been in their office several times about his grades, what he's not doing in the classroom. But the most important reason, my wife told me, you gotta go do something. So I had to go do something. I did not know the gentleman that we were speaking of, he was talking about me. I happened to catch him in the hallways after the bell has rung. I said, okay, guys, where's your class at? Oh, it's right around the corner. He did not know that I was once 17 years old myself, and I was that kid, and I have one at home. So I said, I said, okay, where's your class? Oh, it's around the corner. I said, okay, let's go. So I'm gonna tell your teacher that you were with me so you won't get in trouble. I know he was trying to push me off. So we end up going from one building all the way across the school. And we started talking, things of that nature, and he started telling me what stuff that I knocked on the teacher's school. I said, hey, he was with me. But I did not know that until, I think, 1 week. I happened to be sitting down. He said, oh, that's the guy said that the dad's, he was happy the dad's in school. Now, mind you now, my 17-year-old son attends that school. He said, Dad, you gotta come to school? I said, I'm gonna go up there and see what they need my help, son. And, he said, can't you be like all the rest of the dads and just stay at home? So I'm like, okay. So I'm gonna go and just, because I need to go help him out. So I said, all the things, the support that you've gotten from the school, I think it's only fair for me to go and try to give back. Mind you that my mother was a teacher assistant in Cumberland County, and she always placed emphasis on myself and my siblings that always let the teachers know who you are and who your child is, so they know that, hey, there's accountability. Yeah. Ever since he was in grade school and up, my speeches to his teachers, principal, here's my cell number. If my son gets out of line, just say, hey, do you want me to call your dad? And there's been some times that he's not the perfect child, still trying to get him to clean up his room. But I am so appreciative that Mr. Pickard, Mr. V, they helped my child so much. So I think it's only right for me to give back to the school that gave that so much to my child. Thank you.
Any questions? Yes, Mark. Oh, I'm sorry. Chair, you have to recognize.
I'm sorry.
She.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So first of all,
Let's forward.
First of all, I just wanted to say thank you so much for what you're doing for the students at your school. And I think it truly demonstrates the importance of educators working in collaboration with parents so that we are able to give the best opportunities to all of our kids. And I think you have shown that that's not only possible, but that when we do that, we end up with real magic for our kids. So thank you very much. I was also wondering if you could talk just a little bit about how you use those student surveys to demonstrate growth in your kids. I'm very interested to learn just a little bit more about that.
Sure. So we use a prescribed curriculum for the SEL that was provided by our district, and the lessons are tailored to those different areas. So one of the challenges we had first semester was, the school year started much more challenging than we had thought. We'd said to our teachers at the beginning, this is going to be a tough school year. But I'd be lying to you right now if I stood here and said that it wasn't tough. I mean, this was hard. It's still hard. And so one of the lessons we learned was, how do we make this easier for teachers so it doesn't seem like one more thing? Because we were asking them to deliver a lesson. And so that was where we developed the newsletter, and we actually reached out to the company. Can you develop a pacing calendar? We know teachers like structure, like a pacing calendar, where it's a one-stop shop toolbox where I can click and see, okay, I'm looking for self-efficacy lessons in high school. How can I do that? And one of the pieces of feedback we provided as well was, these are high school kids. So the videos, for elementary kids or whatever, they're not going to cut it. That's just not what high schoolers respond to. So that was one of the pieces we adjusted, was how do we make this more realistic? And we've made some progress there. And one of the other things was, as leaders, how do we monitor that the teachers are actually implementing this? So there was a report we could pull weekly that teacher XYZ had not logged in, or which lessons were they focusing on. The group of Motivating Minds young men, they were part of a group that struggled with anger issues, but also hopelessness, or I don't have a relationship with adults. So that's kind of how we targeted them. So to answer your question, that's one piece, but it's also still a work in progress. And so, for example, I've asked our school psychologist this last round, how do we plan for this summer? We were talking on the way up, how do we pull in groups this summer to continue to work on this? Can we ask our district for some funding to bring in skills for conflict resolution or things of that nature? So still a work in progress, but really trying to hone in on those students and pull out targeted groups that can meet with counselors, behavior modification technicians, administration, to track kind of their growth and see where we need to improve.
Thank you.
All right, can y'all hear me? Which microphone's better? All right. Put my teacher voice on. So first of all, I just wanted to take a moment really just to publicly praise you all, to the school leadership, to the parents, complete adoration, support, encouragement, all the words. What you're doing is beautiful. As a teacher who taught for 5 years on the east side at Garinger High School, you know, there's three things that I noticed. All your commentary, the whole approach is rooted in humanity, number one, right? Just the way that you talk about the holistic endeavor of education, that it goes far and beyond just books and tests and curriculums, but especially after an incident that you all endured, the response to that could have been stigmatizing, but instead you guys have continued to stay anchored in the humanity of your students. And I love that. That's so important. That seems like a small thing, but unfortunately we don't always look at the whole child in the way that we should, or the whole person. The other thing is community. And this is kudos to the parents, because what happens for whatever reason is we don't often invite community in. We don't see the parents as part of the school community. And a lot of times the solutions to some of the biggest, most persistent problems is just being like, you know what, like, we should probably do some outreach and touch base with the parents or the caretakers, the guardians, whoever are in the, you know, whoever's given charge of the parents, and inviting them in to be a part of the process, because don't nobody know better than you. And you can't fake a dad voice. You know what I mean? It's just you can't fake it. You know what I mean? It's just a certain posture. And the last thing I say is redemption. There's a persistent theme of redemption. Y'all, I don't gotta tell you, somebody bought a gun to my daughter's school this week. You understand what I'm saying? I ain't telling you what I heard, I'm telling you what I know. But the response sometimes, particularly with our kids, right, is immediately to entangle them in the criminal justice system, right? And what I hear here is a spirit of redemption. You know, a root cause analysis that says, yeah, we could respond that way, but that doesn't really get to the heart of the issue. The heart of the matter is lack of belonging, lack of self-efficacy, right? Lack of social skills or awareness, right? Situational awareness, etc. So I just wanted to call those things out and appreciate you publicly for what you're doing. Thank you for your leadership. And it's one of them things, you don't got to pilot. We know it works. You know what I mean? Let's expand it. So thank you.
And I know y'all are ready to go. I have to say this. What has been amazing to me is to see our kids of every group in our school, from the most focused to those that we are still trying to get them to understand school matters. Miss Meredith, they're running. Hey, Miss Meredith. Hey, Miss Abby. Hey. Just the impact that they feel during lunch. I have a space where I can just go and breathe for a second. Some of my wet behind the ear guys playing tic-tac-toe just for 10 minutes. It's making an impact in how they view school and how they are, it's been amazing for us just to witness the impact. So that's keeping us inspired and keeping us in the ears of people like you and people in our district. This is a game changer. How do we start making school look different for our kids? And when kids that typically they tell you the truth about anything, when they come up to us and say, that Zen Den is it, like Miss and we can only do it during lunch because of the manpower, but it's making an impact. And I need y'all to understand that. We have to reimagine the face of school. We have to. We have to. So if I can leave you with anything, I have to just say that. We have to start reimagining how we empower our kids.
Fellow board members, I want to thank you for allowing us to take some overtime work here. But to me, this is what school is all about. You can't take a test, you can't do a survey, you can't do a study, but when you involve parents in that school, in that classroom, it makes a difference. And I want to thank you for sharing this group of moms and dads with us, and my good brother Ford. There is something about a dad's voice. It's different. I can hear my dad right now, voice, and then mom will come in and, oh, your dad is so important. Dad is saying it. Yeah. But I appreciate you coming. I thank you for sharing with us. You have you and your group hit that home run for me.
Thank you.
I've been looking for you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, that's it. And I know we took a long time.
That was worth every minute. We'll take all of that we can get, Mr. Hall. Thank
Yes,
you
sir.
so much. And now we'll end on a real high. The Business Operations Committee, led by Vice Chair Duncan.
Well, we don't want to leave out Vice Chair to the Mr. Hall.
Mr. Hall, yes.
We had a good one.
Yeah, my great former friend, no, I'm kidding. We have several items today, and we're going to start with a new piece of business. I have to call on Alexis Schaus to discuss the bonuses to qualifying teachers and instructional support personnel.
Good afternoon again. Yes, I've been requested to present this new business item on an appropriation that was provided under the American Rescue Plan in the last budget. This is not being presented with any recommendation. It is new business. But as you may recall, there was $100 million that was appropriated through the last budget bill that provided a $1,000 bonus to teachers and instructional support that had completed a COVID training, and it was paid for out of ESSA 3, and there was a budgeted amount of $100 million. In that legislation, it also stated that if the actual expenditures exceeded that $100 million, that the unencumbered funds from the other appropriation lines, which there were a total, I believe, of 34 lines related to ESSA 3, then any unobligated funds related to those other lines shall be used for that shortfall for the $100 million. So what this does is it kind of shows a closeout of that line item. Based on the public school units, and this bonus was available to not only local education agencies, but also all public school units, there was a total expenditure of $112 million and a little bit more. And the unencumbered line items from all those other available ESSA 3 lines came to just under $9.5 million. We have in Financial and Business Services taken that $9.5 million and we have allocated out those amounts to those public school units based on their actual expenditures. You can see the math that based on the actual expenditures for the program and the available funding with $100 million plus the unencumbered amounts from the other line items, there was still an additional $3.3 million that public school units did pay to those teachers and instructional support. Generally, they used other ESSA funds, being that 90% grant amount, either from ESSA 1, 2, or 3, that would be an allowable use for those funds.
Are there any questions? It's not an action item. This is really an informational item to follow up on previous items that have come before the board for allotments and so on. But are there any questions or comments about this? Not hearing any.
I do have a quick question,
Hearing
if I
one,
may.
Dr.
I'm
Oxendine.
sorry. Well, when I see reading, it catches my eye.
Yeah.
So I saw something about middle school reading. So tell me about that. How does that get to schools?
So with each one of these line items, there was language associated with it and by the General Assembly, and then we did have a state board policy associated with that. That particular line item was related to middle school reading. I don't have the specific language in front of me, but it named 24, it explicitly named in the legislation 24 either public school units or actually individual schools that were eligible for those funds. And not all those identified public school units or schools actually applied for the funds, and that was why there was a difference of $786,000, was because they are not required. We recall that with these federal funds, unlike state funds, which when they're appropriated, we allocate out to the school districts. They don't have to apply for them. With federal funds, they do have to apply for these funds, even if it's out by formula and not by, kind of competitive grant. So these school districts did not apply for those, or there were charter schools included in that also. They did not apply for the funds.
Oh, my goodness. That's unfortunate.
I'm happy to provide more information for you
Okay.
offline.
That would be good.
Any other questions or comments for Alexis on this item? This should close out this item, but if there's any additional developments on it, we'll of course come back to the board and report them.
Thank you.
Thank you. On action of first reading, we have 3 items. First one is Biz Op 1, approval of contracts over $500,000. We're going to go to the 2-minute drill here. And Dr. Amy Ryan, you've got teaching strategies contract in the Voyager Sopris Learning or the Letters Training, and you have a substitute, no less.
Good afternoon. I'm Dan Tatro.
Yes, Dan, it's good to see you. So on these, what we're trying to do is get, is it required by statute? What is the purpose of the contract? And in terms of, was it bid or was some already set vendor? And then what the amounts are if they are to be compared to previous contracts. So that
Yes,
sort of
sir.
rundown would be helpful.
Okay. So these are both contract amendments. The Teaching Strategies contract is Amendment 7. They provide Teaching Strategies Gold, which is our North Carolina early learning inventory, which serves as the kindergarten entry assessment. The amendment decreases the amount of the contract by about $309,000. We are eliminating some additional optional child portfolios that we had put in place last year in case there was a difference or an increase in kindergarten enrollment due to the pandemic. We are also eliminating a field associate contracted services and transferring those responsibilities to consultants within the Office of Early Learning. And then we're exercising the option to have 7 of our consultants who are trained facilitators of the training for Gold to renew their certifications so they continue to provide training to both kindergarten and actually preschool teachers as well.
So in this contract, there's a net savings, and we give a round of applause. Still getting the same services. Any questions or comments on this contract?
Okay.
All right, the letters training.
Okay, letters, so Lexia Voyager Sopris, they've changed their name, formerly known as Voyager Sopris Learning. This is Amendment 1. We're seeking to extend the time of the contract through September 30th of 2024 to align with the expiration of the ESSER 3 funds. And then also to increase the amount of the contract by a little over $4.75 million to add training for additional LEA staff.
And this is, the additional LEA staff training is along the lines of the training the trainer type approach for longer term sustainability.
So these are actually additional staff. So this would include EC resource teachers, English learner teachers, coaches at the elementary school, as well as just additional staff that were identified as the vendor is meeting individually with school districts. They have identified additional staff that were not included in the first self-report from districts for the number of staff that would need to be trained.
Very good. Questions or comments on this one, Mr. Tatro? All right, not hearing any. Thank you very much. Don't know if you made 2 minutes, but you were in the ballpark. Thank you. Dr. Rob Dietrich, SchoolNet, Britannica, and EBSCO. Just because you have 3 minutes doesn't take you off, 3 items doesn't get you off the 2-minute clock. So.
We're going to stick to 2 minutes if we can. The first is, good afternoon. The first is SchoolNet contract extension, contract renewal. This goes with the improvement instruction system. It's one of the applications within Home Base, and it is used to data-driven platform that aligns the student assessments and curriculum with the standard course of study. If you recall, this is the opt-in model that is used for Home Base. The district's PSUs will opt in, and that is how this is funded. What is different this year, they usually pay $1, which remains the same. This year, what has changed is we are adding Transcend, which is a product of theirs, which is computer-based assessments that they do formative real-time over the course of a year. And once they opt into SchoolNet for $1, they would then have the option to opt into Transcend for an extra $4 to give them that package deal. And that is for SchoolNet.
And those contract numbers are sort of up to a limit of?
Up to a limit of $5.4 million.
Right, and that would cover if every possible use was made, so the
That's correct, and
likely actual number is less.
that is correct.
All right, Britannica, unless there are questions on that, I'm sorry, I'll slow down. All right, Britannica.
Encyclopedia Britannica and EBSCO really kind of have the same description. They are digital avenues for resources that are stored currently in the NC Ed cloud, so that we are able to provide PSUs with the ability to get to the same resources statewide through a digital platform. And for Britannica, that goes through 2025 for about $1 million.
And for Britannica, that's a renewal?
That is a renewal as well, yes, sir. All these are renewals.
Right.
And then for EBSCO, that is a renewal through 2026 for $1.7 million.
Very good. Any questions or comments on those two resource items? Ms. White?
I'm so sorry, I do not know what EBSCO is.
All right, good.
Sure, EBSCO is kind of a clearinghouse where it just houses a bunch of data, so you're able to click on it. It throws up a bunch of resources that students can choose from.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, and it's been part of the...
It's been part of, was formerly known as NCYSAL, which is, there are many searches. Yeah, you're good? Okay, good. I'll use the old language from back in the day. We're good.
I thought that reminder would bring back a lot of memories.
Good or bad or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Tracy Tillis, our IT manager for Student Information Systems, has an item on ECATs. Welcome.
Good afternoon, and thank you for your time and consideration. I'm bringing before you today Amendment 11 of the existing ECATS contract. It extends services and support through June 2024 with an additional optional 2 years after that. The total not to exceed for this amendment is $11.6 million. That is a high cost estimate. We have included some additional items in addition to service and support. That includes 900 bank hours for year 6 and 900 bank hours for year 7. That will allow us to implement some of the requests and enhancements that have been suggested by the field. It also includes MTSS translation. As you know, I came before you to implement the special education module translation. This would add for the MTSS piece.
Tracy, can you explain for people what bank hours means?
Sure. So instead of me coming to you every time we have an enhancement that we would like to do, which is what we've been doing over the last couple of years, it would allow us to have that set 900 hours to plan for that enhancement development. Again, we wouldn't be paying for it until the work is complete, but it would mean that it's already set aside in this particular amendment, and we wouldn't have to keep coming back month after month.
Very good.
So, and the last thing of note at the bottom of the executive summary, you'll notice that this is a high estimate, specifically for Tier 1 support. You'll see in the entire contract that it has bands of support. We've never actually exceeded band 1 in the tier of support, but we have that in there just as a contingency in case we do exceed that band 1.
It's used for a tibia fracture.
In case we do exceed band 1. The MTSS translation is also set up according to band pricing. From 0 to 200 intervention plans would be about $131,000 each year, but we have to put the maximum possibility in the not to exceed in case we go above what we expect.
Thank you. Any questions or comments on that? All right. excellent job, particularly considering Mr. Hall's efforts to distract you. You played right through that. Wonderful.
I'll return the favor sometime.
Look forward to that. Thank you, Tracy.
This is a wild time.
Yeah, always entertaining. Biz Op 2, item 2, is elementary and secondary school relief for ESSER 3 budget considerations. And this is the use of administrative funds, which has already been referred to earlier in our meeting today. Joyce Monroe is here to present that. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. This item is related to COVID relief funding that's been authorized under the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. There are three parts to this request. The first component seeks the reallocation of ESSER 3 administrative reserve funds to ESSER 3 state aid leadership funds for the expansion of support to low-performing districts and schools. And specifically, this reallocation of funds will support the addition of 6 full-time, time-limited positions, including a district leadership coach, school leadership coach, and 4 instructional coaches, which will bring the total number of positions that are focused in this area to 20. The total request for salary benefits and operational support is approximately $1.2 million for a full year, which translates to just over $2.6 million in costs through September 2024. The second component of this request seeks the use of ESSER administrative funds to pay for the costs related to our updating of our agency grant application system, which is called CCIP. And this is the system that we use for ESSER grant programs as well as other grant programs that we support. Lastly, we recommend the extension of funding for the administrative positions and related administrative costs that were previously approved by the state board using ESSER 1 administration funds. These administrative positions total 5.6 FTE in our federal programs, internal audit, and school business monitoring and compliance areas. The extension is to be funded with ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 administrative funds through September 2024.
So this last item refers to our extensive obligations to audit, to provide audits with respect to the federal funding audit that goes on. We had already approved that. Just make sure we have it for the entirety of the time that the audits will be required with the money. If you go back to item A just for a moment.
Sure.
Briefly. That item covers the 6 support personnel that we have referred to in our discussions earlier. That's the item that covers that. Just to connect the dots for a moment. All right, any questions or comments? Thank you for this report. Not hearing any, thank you.
Thank you.
And I should interject here that our friend Reggie Keenan has contacted me in the interim. He has been listening to our call. He just is unable, he's having technological difficulties and is not able to be heard. So just wanted to make sure we gave that explanation. Biz Op 3 is the legislative report on supplemental funds for teacher compensation, and Alexis Schaus is back with us for that report.
Thank you. Yes, this is a legislative report related to the new the new appropriation that was allocated out per the legislative formula to allow school districts to have $100 million spread across, of course, all of them, to provide additional supplemental teacher compensation.
Actually, this is the one that was spread out to 95 counties out of the 100, not all of them.
Thank you, sir. Yes, that is correct. There was a threshold based on tax base that did exclude eligibility of some school districts. There was, with this appropriation, a requirement for a report, and the report requested information that we were not able to provide at this time due to the late passage of the budget, and as a result, the late approvals of the local board of the supplement, as well as the payroll actually going out. So we have provided this report based on the requirements of 1 and 2 that are in the legislation, which is really the how much each eligible school district received in total out of that $100 million. And then, as I stated, the items 3 through 7, I believe it is, we did not have that data available by the deadline for this report.
Which we will explain in providing the report that the data was not available. Any questions or comments on this? All right, not seeing any. That ends our actions on first reading. We move to a discussion item, and this is one that we have been following closely, the school transportation policy update. Call on Kevin Harrison. Welcome, Kevin, to update us on where things are.
Sure, thank you for having me again. So as we discussed recently, I want to deal with a couple of topics primarily today. An allotment policy update, as well as an update on the current year fuel situation. So start with the policy update. Our goals for this policy update to ALOT-003 is to, one, remove an outdated item. It's related to 2021 funding, 2020, 2021 funding, and only applied for like a month out of the year. So that can go now. We wanted to also add to the policy to reduce, with 3 primary goals, reduce uncertainty by placing a floor on each LEA's funding allocation for next year for school transportation funding. We also wanted to tailor this, though, to indicate some transition back into standard funding methodologies for 2022, 2023, 2024, all these years. And to also allow enough funding to be reserved to make sure that we can still distribute the funds equitably to those districts with more students or smaller losses of students. If you think of it from a logistical perspective, our data from this year, I mean, some districts have 30 or 40% less students on buses when we counted in the fall. We don't want to presuppose that that will continue into next year, but at the same time, if you've lost 40% of your students and that persists into next year, you probably don't need the same amount of money next year as you had this year if 40% of your students are not there. So key elements of that, no less than 90% of the 2021-2022 allocation would be reserved for allotment to each LEA in 2022-23. That way we make sure that we set a floor at 90% of what they received this year. That is prior to adjustments for all the stuff that may come from the General Assembly's budget this year, such as increases for ADM, salary, benefits, fuel cost increases, anything of that nature that may come from the General Assembly. That's before all of those adjustments. We also wanted to indicate, as is more traditional, this is an element of normality, that ABC transfers indicate that you don't need the money, and that normally impacts your transportation funding in the next year because you said, I don't really need the money. I can use it somewhere else. So that would negatively impact funding in next year if you said we don't need this money for transportation. Now, understanding, however, that there may be circumstances where, just due to personnel issues, that you need the money next year, but you didn't need it this year because there were so many positions vacant. We're going to also add in that reversions, which would also normally negatively impact next year's transportation funding, do not negatively impact transportation funding in 22-23. So essentially it's sort of like, well, if you don't need it, just leave it there and we'll assume that you do need it for next year. Unallocated funds are really, the initially unallocated funds are really just there to reserve and assure that when we get numbers in for ridership this fall, that we can allocate money equitably to those whose ridership bounces back to previous levels, and that we want to make sure, and then one more key element was that if you're transferring funds out, then we don't want to give you extra funds, right? We don't want ABC transfers to be a tool. You can't request extra transportation funding for fuel and then transfer the money out to another area of the district. An indication that you've used all the funding you have first. So those are the key elements of the policy change. So just an update on current year fuel pricing.
Kevin, before
sure.
you do that for one
Yeah,
second,
go
on
ahead.
the policy change.
Certainly.
That's a very good focus on what we're doing next year as an interim step, trying to get the policy back into some kind of balanced approach as we go forward. it also gives you and colleagues in the field around the state a chance to digest, does the formula need to be adjusted during that year as we look to the future in any ways to make a determination of how to best go forward. And that's, I think we should say to the board, that's something that will be looked at during the course of that year because it gives us that grace period to be able to do it.
Certainly, yes, it does. And we will have more data based on fall transportation data and also how this year winds out. We don't know from an expenditure perspective just what every district is going to have to do this year quite yet. We usually don't get that final information until early fall.
Sorry for stopping.
No, you're fine, perfectly fine. I'm just trying to keep it moving. Stop me at any time. So our current year fuel pricing, we had mentioned before, about $4.7 million unbudgeted reserves. Now, again, we're still gathering information on some of those allotments, but some of those additional allotments that are traditionally done in May. But $4.7 million unbudgeted. The requests did exceed. We had collected requests from the district on additional fuel costs. The requests not only expected, they did exceed the amount of the $4.7 million. So we're going to work with school business on that. Not by a tremendous amount so far, but it really only covers differences through April, mid-April. So we expect to have even more beyond the requests we have. We go back out a second time because we're basing it on invoices. It's necessary to come back out again to cover them for more time, the month of May, for example. So anything unfunded or underfunded remain the district's responsibility as always, but we're going to try and determine any available sources of funds. As you might imagine, with fuel prices, this week is somewhere in the order of over $4 a gallon presently this week. Some districts indicated that they were getting quotes for $4.80 a gallon, which is very, very high compared to what should be paid for fuel. So we continue to monitor that and try and hole up as much of it as we can this year, make whole as much as we can for this year. So that was our round one request. There's your summary for the round one request. There were 77 counties requested funding, 3 requested no funding, 20 did not provide a response by the deadline, which we extended. $5.75 million was requested. We don't have everything complete. Not all the requests are complete. Not all the documentation has been received, but we're doing pretty good trying to track it all down. But it only covers mid to late April. So we are going to intent on coming back out for additional requests to cover anything that they have not covered so far. So on to the next slide, those additional requests. So assuming we can secure some funding for those additional requests, we would intend to accept another round of requests covering through the end of the allotment deadline, which I believe allotments have to be provided to school business by like the 26th or 27th of May, somewhere in there, in order to be in the final allotment for the year. So we would cover all the way up until the day before the last, whatever we can cover, and to be allotted in the last allotment in early June. So that is what we're doing on fuel for this year.
So to our friends in the district, we're going to do everything that we can to send out everything that's reserved and look for any additional funding that can be available within the department. We may not be able to cover everything, but we're doing our dead level best.
That's right.
Fair message.
Absolutely.
But they also need to ask for it.
They do need to ask.
We should know that some of these districts are probably not asking, because I'll use Wake as an example. They have a long-term contract, so they don't have to ask. So there are some that wouldn't ask because they don't have to, although there's probably not 23 of those.
Probably not. And as I say, of those, only 3 of them responded, no, we don't need any. The other 20 simply did not respond. We did ask for responses from everyone, but sometimes that doesn't exactly go like you want. We're still chasing those.
If we will continue to message it, that's what we can do. And
absolutely.
So we will continue to message it. So this is a great, you all have done some very good work over the last 2 months in an unexpected dilemma that we have, and I appreciate the work you're putting in. Are there questions or comments for Kevin on the policy for this coming year or for the immediate issues of gas for this year? No question. That's pretty good.
Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. We appreciate all your work. And I should say this, since Kevin's here from Dr. Harvey's department, Dr. Harvey lost her husband yesterday, and it's something that's she's been so devoted to for a long time, and we all send our very, very best wishes to her and her family during this difficult time. So, thank you. Our next item is consent items, and we have two of them. Originally had three, but we have two for presentation. One is, this used to be a sort of routine matter. Now it's a moment of rejoicing. We have certification of 2 financial officers in 2 districts, so that still leaves us in double figures short, but still it's, and we have a lot of work to do in that area, and thank you to Alexis and her staff. We are convening some groups to try to figure out some solutions and approaches for trying to resolve some of these issues, or at least improve them. So we're very appreciative of that. Our second consent item is a report on supplanting low wealth supplemental funds and small school system supplemental funds. This is a report required by the legislature annually. The goal is to say we have nothing to report, that nobody supplanted it, and we met our goal. Nobody supplanted any of these funds, and so the goal, so this report is exactly what the legislature will be happy to see. Thanks for all involved for doing that. We had updates on contracts, the executed contracts report and the planned contracts report. The planned contracts report was mostly contracts we've already covered that are over $500,000. Anyone have any questions on any of those? I did not get any in advance, but in case anyone does. All right. And then we had the monthly budget report that went out, but we don't have any special reporting right now because our staff is Ms. Schaus. We do have special reporting.
Well, no, I wouldn't call, well, yes, it's a special report. So I just wanted to direct you to, that you should have all received the highlights of the North Carolina Public School budget that we put out. We compile every year in a uniform manner. It is the same data, so you can have comparative data. We've done that in a similar format for at least the last 20 years. And it is kind of, it provides a lot of information on a lot of different things, whether that's E-rate or charter schools or the average teacher compensation, the percentage of public school budget of the general fund, those kind of things. It's also expanded into kind of explanations of restart schools and the ISD, et cetera. So I provide this to you so that you have this as your companion at all times. And so that you are a wealth of knowledge for those that ask. So I do use it as my crutch for many things, and I hope you enjoy it.
Don't leave, Dr. Oxendine has a question.
Yes, this is such a good report, and I use it a lot in my courses. I'm wondering, is it online?
Yes, ma'am. So we do have that on the Financial and Business Services website. It is currently on our homepage under What's New, and generally we do move it into, like, so all the highlights documents going back at least for 20 years are also archived there, so you can see comparative data of allotment formulas, etc.
Because what I do is make copies. I wonder, though, is it on sale? I mean, can it be purchased in the building? Like at one time, you could purchase documents.
That is true. I actually do not know what the status is of our publications area on that, but I mean, it is available for you to reproduce off our website.
Yes,
we do not have a copyright on it, but we take the credit, hopefully.
Oh, sure.
Being in academia, I know that you would do that.
I want you to autograph it for me.
Well, I've got mine here. I've got, so it's like, yes. So, but I'd have to ask our communications area if you wanted it reproduced in a similar manner.
Please do.
So thank you. And I want to say thanks to you and your team and colleagues, because it's a very, very busy time. You've got the federal funding to keep track of, along with our friends in federal funding area. We've got a third quarter closeout. We're preparing for year-end closeout, and then we'll be doing year-end closeout. Y'all been doing an awful lot, a lot of difficult work, and I do want to express on behalf of the committee and the board our appreciation for the work that you and others are doing, just as I do to the others who have reported here today. Thank you all very much.
My staff and I do appreciate that recognition. It's a challenge, but just one related to those finance officers. We do have I think, approximately 15 vacancies at this time, and we do anticipate with some of the large school districts will become open either through retirement or resignations. I guess it comes to the same thing, but so we are anticipating a significant shift in our finance officers, and we are working through that NC-ASBO contract to support all the new finance officers, and I think it is incredibly valuable work, not only for our finance officers and their staff, but also for the local superintendents that will be able to help them, because many of them are filling in for those positions.
Yeah, we're in a very, very difficult circumstance right now. We need to find ways out. All right, thank you as always. That concludes our report, Chair Davis. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. My thanks to my colleagues and advisors, our superintendent and staff, and other contributors for today's meeting. This concludes our committee meetings. I ask for a motion to go into closed session, and note for the audience and online listeners that following closed session, the May 4th, 2022 meeting will adjourn immediately. Vice Chair Duncan.
I move that we go into closed session pursuant to North Carolina General Statute, Section 143-318.11A136, to prevent the disclosure of personnel information that is privileged or confidential pursuant to North Carolina General Statute, Sections 115C-319 and 321, to consider the qualifications, competence, performance, or condition of appointment of public officers or employees or prospective public officers or employees, and to consult with our attorneys in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege between the attorneys and the public body, including specifically to consider the cases of Kathy Reeves versus Freddie Williamson et al., Michael versus NC DPI, In Ray Bridges Academy, and State Board of Education versus Minnick.
Motion by Vice Chair Duncan. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Hall. Ms. Martin, will you call the roll to capture the vote?
Yes. Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Camnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan? Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Blackburn?
Yes.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
State Treasurer Falwell? Lieutenant Governor Robinson? Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes, motion carries. Let's move into closed session at 4:30. 4:30. We're adjourned.